The Mittani Empire is one of the most perplexing political entities in Mesopotamian history, mostly due to the scarcity of internal written records. Reconstructing the origin and organization of this state, which at its zenith spanned Upper Mesopotamia, the Levant to the west, the Piedmont Plains, of the Zagros to the east, and portions of Anatolia, is challenging. Recent research over the past few decades has demonstrated that such a reconstruction is not altogether implausible. This volume illustrates how a territory of extraordinary magnitude in Upper Mesopotamia was maintained under Mittani dominion for an extended duration. The documents compiled herein stem from the conference titled Constituent, Confederate, and Conquered Space: The Case of the Mittani Transition. The primary objective of the conference was to elucidate the emergence of the Mittani state in Upper Mesopotamia by analyzing, firstly, the preceding political and cultural frameworks in Upper Mesopotamia and northern Syria, and secondly, the contemporaneous Hittite kingdom, whose activities may have played a pivotal role in the ascendance of the Mittani state. This approach raises a fundamental question. To what degree does the character of acquired territory shape the arrangement of political space? Is the distinctive nature of the Mittani state primarily attributable to the interaction of several spatial organizational modes present in the region? In other words, did the accomplishments and failures of previous or concurrent political structures influence establishing a newly emergent state? The case study of Mittani is particularly intriguing due to its association with a complex ethnic background. Hurrian was the primary language for significant segments of the people, although Akkadian dialects were dominant in the surrounding areas. Nonetheless, the ruling elites of Mittani exhibit certain linguistic connections to the Indo-Aryan language group, although likely communicating in Hurrian, a language that, along with Urartian, constitutes its own distinct language family. A prevalent notion among scholars on Mittani is its association with technological advancements, such as the development of the horse-drawn chariot, and a specific kind of governance, such as confederate models. This concept prevailed in the discourse for an extended period. Consequently, issues of appropriation and cultural identity are essential in the discourse about Mittanian hegemony. Academics continue to dispute the significance of this ethno-linguistic association in the reconstruction of the Mittani state. See the essays of Vondasso, De Martino, and Schwartz in this volume. The same applies to the nomenclature and characterization of Mittani as a socio-political and cultural phenomenon. It is referred to as the Mittani polity, Schwartz, this volume, kingdom, Fondasso, this volume, or even state, Yoffi, this volume. The editors deemed it essential to permit these variants to remain as potential avenues for future research, and to illustrate the challenges inherent in reconstructing this old territorial entity. Mittani in cuneiform texts denotes a geopolitical entity centered in the Kabul Triangle of northern Syria. Modern literature references denote this place as Hanigalbat or Naharina, Nahrima. The hegemony of the kings of Mittani extended over a far greater territory, encompassing approximately the regions currently known as northern Iraq and northern Syria. The origins of what became known as the land of Mittani are obscure. Given that Hurrian-speaking communities emerged in Upper Mesopotamia in the latter half of the 3rd millennium, it is generally presumed that establishing a Mittani state transpired in the 16th century. The imperial control of the Mittani state is challenging to discern, particularly for non-written data, such as archaeological evidence. One of its two capitals, Wazvizvukani, remains undiscovered, but the second, Taidu, is likely to be associated with either Tall Brak or Tall Hamidiye, both of which exhibit substantial architectural remnants from the Middle and Late Bronze Age. The absence of textual sources in the Mittani state complicates the comprehension of the state's true political compulsion. Textual sources from external regions predominantly limit our understanding of Mittani. These sources indicate that the Mittani state formation was one of several superpowers in the latter half of the second millennium, engaging in peaceful and aggressive interactions. Western Syria is significant, as it was the subject of direct claims by the Egyptian pharaoh, the Hittite king, and, to a lesser extent, the king of Babylon. As a result, the sources reference numerous notable engagements. However, there were also periods of significant exchange and interaction, as evidenced by certain letters, predominantly in Akkadian, dispatched by the Mittani kings to the Egyptian pharaoh, which form part of the diplomatic correspondence discovered at Tall El Amarna, the Foreign Office of 14th century Egypt. These letters confirm international diplomatic relations among significant powers in the 14th century BC. At least once, a dynastic marriage united the royal families of Mittani and Egypt. King Tushratta of Mittani dispatched his daughter to the Nile Empire, accompanied by a notably generous dowry. The correspondence regarding this incident is an exceptionally notable document, yet it remains the sole significant writing in Hurrian from the Mittani state. Numerous treaties established with monarchs or royal family members of Mittani have been discovered at Hattusa, the capital of the adjacent Hittite Empire in Anatolia. They confirm the connections between the two and demonstrate significant interaction between the two domains. Moreover, Hittite historiographic and semi-historiographic literature alludes to the developmental phase of the Hurrian-speaking kingdom. Assyria ascended as a significant international power in northern Mesopotamia during the 14th century BC. The state of Mittani ultimately succumbed, pressured by two formidable adversaries. By the late 14th century, the Assyrians conquered the ancient Mitannian heartland, establishing the Euphrates as the boundary between Hatti and Assur. This approach's conceptual structure of constituent, confederate, and conquered space was notably significant. In the context of this meeting, constituent space denoted the fundamental elements of the cultural landscape of Upper Mesopotamia. This encompasses the natural landscape, e.g., mountains, valleys, rivers, plains, etc., fundamental patterns of habitation and subsistence, and essential patterns of material culture, particular to or prevalent across many political landscapes. Constituent space fundamentally examines the local dimensions of political entities. Confederate space is a political construct consisting of confederations, or forms of loose collaboration among local political organizations. This includes patterns of economic, social, or political organization that extend beyond local political entities, including ethno-linguistic or tribal regions, as well as trade exchange patterns. Confederate space may also encompass cultural collaboration and cooperation expressed through religious practices or literary traditions. Ultimately, these seized space delineated institutions established by expanding political entities aiming to augment their political and economic dominions. In studying the ancient Near East, I see that these predominant political organizations have generally been seen as imperial entities, designated as empires. This may appear outdated, as contemporary historians associate the term empire with early modern formations. Predominantly, though not exclusively, colonial empires like the Tsarist or British empires. This usage does not align with the original definition of imperium in an ancient Roman setting, denoting the geographical expansion and temporal extension of authority. The meaning aligns more closely with observations from the ancient Near East. Therefore, the term empire should be associated with the concept of extended power relations, which may or may not manifest in the subjugated territory. An illustration of a conquered space in early second millennium Upper Mesopotamia is the well-documented endeavor by Samsi Aduduram to establish an empire. This nomenclature was developed to establish a structural foundation for the contributions in this collection. Various perspectives and observational levels were presented throughout the conference, including discussions on the functioning of the Mittani government. The editors opted to reorganize the submissions according to a phenomenological framework. The initial section of this volume, Imperial Constructs, Modes of Governance, presents the latest research and insights regarding the emergence and internal dynamics of the Mittani state. Due to the incomplete textual evidence regarding the Mittani state, it is essential to consult sources from regions governed by the Mittani state, or those that engaged with it in other capacities. While this primarily provides indirect evidence, it aids in reconstructing the emergence of the Mittani state and its capacity to govern an extensive territory. As von Dassow, this book, correctly observes, a singular government paradigm did not prevail across the Mittani Empire. They governed the diverse kingdoms by implementing relatively moderate control and tailoring their techniques to local needs. Otto, this volume, emphasizes that the Mittani governed kingdoms like Alalak and Ugarit, and collectively administered polities in the Euphrates Valley. Otto's examination of archaeological material convincingly corroborates this. It indicates that Mittani did not alter the established governance structures in the region through monarchy or communal leadership by elders and mayors, provided their objectives were met. Notwithstanding this advancement, De Martino cautions that the origins of the Mittani state remain ambiguous. Hittite textual texts remain the primary resource for reconstructing these origins. Following a thorough examination of these sources, it is now acknowledged that the decline of the Amorite kingdom of Yamhad and the Syrian monarchs facilitated the ascendance of Mittani, De Martino, and Klinger, this volume. The validity of De Martino's assertion regarding the origins of the Mittani state being rooted in military confrontations remains uncertain, yet it is evident that its emergence was marked by repeated military engagements. The contributions to the second volume of this book, Political Landscapes, Antecedents in Upper Mesopotamia, aim to elucidate the political underpinnings underlying the Mittani state. This significance arises from the reality that no state exists in isolation, and the Mittani and Hurrians did not abruptly emerge in the political and cultural arena. This relates to the notion that settlements and ways of life are influenced by geographical conditions, constitutive space. Refer to the contributions in the subsequent section. Initially, the kingdom of Ebla appears to be relatively remote, chronologically speaking, representing an early dynastic state formation outside of Mesopotamia, when viewed from a Sumer and Akkad-centric perspective. Nonetheless, the depiction Biga offers in this volume illustrates how Ebla exemplifies the Mesopotamian city-state across various dimensions: political, social, and cultural. Conversely, the Eblite kingdom structured its area and asserted extensive claims of authority, akin to the operational methods of the Mittani kingdom. Biga notes that several cities within Mittani were significant during the Ebla kingdom, suggesting a degree of systemic continuity in northern Syria. Michael's contribution focuses on the old Assyrian material about the commercial network between Assur and Anatolia between the 19th and 18th century BCE. Hurrian presence in the region dates back to the 3rd millennium. The business communication of the old Assyrian merchants indicates, albeit minimally, that Hurrians were somewhat involved in long-distance economic connections. In doing so, they still appear part of the region's original populace. Idem's study provides intriguing insights into the early history of Mittani. It discusses the interactions between Hurrian polities in the Zagros and the kingdom of Samsu-Adu-Affirm, subsequently detailing their power expansion into northeastern Iraq's plains. This is undoubtedly a transient event. However, it does not signify the definitive roots of Mittani, and it may still act as their inspiration. Idem's analysis of the evidence also uncovers particular socio-political frameworks that may have facilitated the relative success of Mittani hegemony. Considering the many administration systems present in the Mittani kingdom, it is noteworthy that political fragmentation was already evident in northern Syria around the 18th century BC. The Mari archives suggest that the Hurrians resided north of the Upper Kabul region and closely interacted with the Amorites. This provides an additional fragment of the jigsaw, indicating a degree of continuity in this geographical region. Levantine states under Mittanian dominance. When Mittani entered the historical record, it was a fully developed kingdom with an established empire. During the mid-15th century, Mittani attained suzerainty over Alalakh and Kizzuwatna, likely incorporating these territories into its existing collection of vassal kingdoms. Initially, Egyptian forces led by Amenhotep I, or potentially his successor Thutmose I, confronted Mittani, unequivocally recognizing it as a regional hegemon, if not an imperial entity. Ancient Hittite records allow you insight into the kingdom's early development in the 16th century, before it acquired Mittani, or an empire. Aggregating all references to Mittani, or Proto-Mittani, under this or alternative designations, yields a broad overview of the kingdom and its historical context. However, the events and processes that led to the formation, expansion, and governance of the polity known as Mittani remain largely obscured by a dearth of direct evidence. We possess neither archives nor royal inscriptions from Mittani itself. Only a limited number of letters and documents originating from there, discovered in the archives of their recipients. Nor do we have accounts of its founding monarchs, as is the case with the Akkadian Empire, nor any other form of literary evidence, such as the royal hymns and letters that offer insights into the kings of Ur. When the sources are abundant and diverse enough to create a somewhat accurate depiction of Mittani, it is an empire in the throes of decline. This situation is not Mittani's responsibility. Its scribes adeptly modified cuneiform to transcribe Hurrian with superior phonetic accuracy compared to the Akkadian and Sumerian they also utilized. Nonetheless, most of the records they presumably generated have either not endured or remained undiscovered. It is only unfortunate luck, both for Mittani and for us. Consequently, we depend on the documentation maintained or generated by individuals engaged with the Mittani. It is essential to recognize that we refer to the subject as Mittani, not due to its historical nomenclature, but rather for the convenience of employing a singular, unequivocal designation for the political entity also identified as Hanigal, whose monarch was termed King of the Hurrian troops, and whose territory was additionally known by the West Semitic appellation Naharina or Nahrima, signifying riverland or rivers twain, which was favored in Egypt. This study examines the form, organization, and dynamics of Mittani's empire in the Levant and the territories it governed. This entails examining inquiries on Mittani's acquisition of hegemony over Levantine kingdoms, the territory's governance, and those countries' responses to Mittanian authority. This paper does not address Mittani's interactions with Levantine kingdoms, which it did not govern. The most substantial textual sources relevant to these inquiries originate from 15th century Alalakh. These may be augmented by sources from Araphe on the opposite side of the empire, while numerous other sites or text corpora provide relatively less or less valuable content. This collection has a minimum of one tablet from Terka, Talbazi, Talbrak, Ancient Naga, El Mara, and Amar. It encompasses viewpoints, statistics, and excerpts from the archives of Hattusa, Egyptian writings, and the Amarna correspondence beyond the confines of Mittani's dominion. Over the past century, the accumulated data reveals minimal information on the Mittani Empire, creating a vacuum that invites dubious explanations. Initially, we must dismiss two interconnected approaches to studying Mittani. One, asserting that the kingdom's inception and swift expansion were due to the influx of a new population, particularly an Aryan one. And 2, contending that these occurrences resulted from the development of a novel military technology, specifically horse-drawn chariots. Having thoroughly examined these concerns in other contexts, I will outline them here. 1. The Mittani kingdom was not established by an Aryan population freshly settled in southwestern Asia. A small amount of Indo-Aryan vocabulary and proper nouns were integrated into Mittani's Hurrian language, while disseminating throughout the territories Mittani engaged during the empire's peak. No individuals in Mittani utilized the Indo-Aryan source language, as the borrowed terms were incompatible with the borrowing language. There is an absence of Indo-Aryan grammatical influence, and there is no more evidence indicating that the donor language was ever spoken within the kingdom. The limited Indo-Aryan linguistic evidence does not confirm an Indo-Aryan speaking populace's existence, much alone the prevalence. The kingdom's identity was Hurrian, as evidenced by multiple allusions to the king of Mittani as king of Hurri land, or king of the Hurrian troops, not king of the Aryan troops or similar. The custom of assigning throne titles of Indo-Aryan origin to the majority of Mittani's rulers implies considerable interaction with an Indo-Aryan speaking community. Yet it does not imply that the royal lineage, let alone the ruling elite, possessed Aryan blood, whatever that may signify. 2. Mittani's success was not attributable to employing horse-drawn chariots in warfare, nor did this innovation originate with Mittani. The kingdom's contemporaries and adversaries contributed to the evolution of charity, and the evidence does not indicate that it started among the polities or peoples preceding Mittani. Military achievement was crucial to the establishment and expansion of Mittani, while military innovation was not. Therefore, no distinct role can be ascribed to the social class linked to charity, referred to by the Hurrianized Indo-Aryan term Marian. More details provided below. This class was formed after the establishment of Mittani. It was not a catalyst for the empire's development, but rather a consequence. Characterizing the incursion of chariot-riding Aryans or analogous factions to address the knowledge deficit constitutes a pseudo-historical aspiration rather than a legitimate historical elucidation. The ascendance of the Mittani cannot be attributed to the Hurrians' expansion and dominance, or the fabricated Indo-Aryan conquest. Popular and oversimplified explanations for historical change persist in attributing it to people's movements. While individuals sometimes migrate, perhaps in collectives or as part of an ethnic group, such movement rarely serves as the primary catalyst for historical transformation. Similarly, it is accurate to assert that new military technology does not remain exclusive to any single demographic for an extended period. The new technology functions as a component when integrated with the elements that facilitated its initial development. In this instance, explanations of various kinds are neither substantiated by the facts nor offer a credible or adequate account of them. Employing a deus ex machina, such as a fabricated population increase, is an inadequate approach to historiography. It is essential to engage in more than merely collecting and summarizing facts pertinent to the issue at hand. Thus, it remains essential to collect pertinent sources and data for the ongoing inquiry. But inferential procedures are also required to formulate a theory that elucidates the observed facts and clarifies the organization and administration of Mittani's kingdom. In the next section, I shall enumerate sources and their contents, while also examining synthetic methodologies that may aid in constructing a model of Mittanian governance. The political environment. The geographical extent of Mittani's dominion can be delineated based on existing sources. The empire's boundaries reached east to Arafeh, north to the latitude of Lake Van, south to Terka, and west across territories previously under Halab's dominion, excluding Amar and Astarte. At one point, it extended as far west as Kizzuwatna and as far south as Tunip or beyond, before the loss of various kingdoms to Hatti. Contemporary practices often involve inferring contiguous territorial control from these data points, thereby depicting the empire as encompassing those areas on the map. Nevertheless, the effective governance of even the most formidable Late Bronze Age state typically extended only slightly beyond the surrounding towns and, on an advantageous day, the connecting roads. To comprehend the map of Mittani's empire, envision it as a network of control points, each representing the capital of a kingdom or province encircled by more points inside the same network. The area between or beyond these interconnected nodes does not constitute the territory of Mittani or any other state. The Hittite kingdom later altered this political landscape paradigm. Vassal kingdoms. The case of Alalakh. What type of authority did Mittani exert on the states under its dominance? What was the governance framework, and what procedures facilitated Mittani's rule? The textual records from various locations indicate differing responses, suggesting that a uniform model was not applicable across the empire. I shall commence my analysis of these difficulties by concentrating on Alalakh, as it offers the most substantial quantity and diversity of pertinent texts, but not an extensive amount. It is beneficial to enumerate these sources, notwithstanding their prior extensive scholarly examination. The subsequent list encapsulates their pertinent substance. 2 parity treaties, Alti III, between Idrimi of Alalakh and Pilia of Kizzuwatna, and Alti II, between Nikmepa of Alalakh and Irtesvisvub of Tunip. Alti III, a treaty regarding the reciprocal extradition of fugitives, was established between the parties under the auspices of Paratarna, king of Mittani. Alti II is a more comprehensive accord with reciprocal communication between the parties involved. It encompasses various subjects, including how individuals transition between the two domains and delineating responsibilities. The document was endorsed by the king of the Hurrian troops, who served as the sovereign for both parties, and it would be rendered invalid should any party violate their commitment to their sovereign. 2 legal rulings by Saus of Tartar, king of Mittani, favouring Nikmepa. Alt 13. A resident of Alalakh cannot assert identity as a Hanigulbatian. More elaboration on this subject is provided below, in Socio-Political Organization, pages 22-28, and thus substantiates Nikmepa's assertion of ownership over the town of Alawari against Sunasura of Kizzuwatna. 4 letters communicate directives for the king of Mittani. 3 letters from Tiris Ra, presumably a Mittanian official, are addressed to Nikmepa. In Alt 110, Tiris Ra directs Nikmepa to apprehend certain individuals and deliver them to him. Alti 111 pertains to a specific individual's movable assets and the arrangement of an escort for him. And in Alti 112, Tiris Ra notifies Nikmepa that a legal dispute before the king has been resolved unfavourably for him, and instructs Nikmepa to provide the plaintiff with the women he contested. Another letter, Alti 108, is sent by the king to one Uti, instructing him to release toll-free the asses that Nikmepa had complained about. It is presumed that Uti governed a nearby kingdom, and this tablet found its way into Nikmepa's archive, as he was the benefactor of the decision it communicated. Regrettably, 2 administrative records mention Mittani, without sufficient contextual information to inform the reader of the circumstances. Alti 224 enumerates the men associated with several towns under Alalakh's domain under the title, "These men are going to the land of Mittani." Following a pause, the enumeration resumes with counts of men linked to other towns, the palace, specific duties or objectives, Mittani and individuals, including Tiris Ra. 13. Al-T 340, which is somewhat ambiguous, contains a list of 9 ox herds associated with the land of Hurri, perhaps referring to Mittani. The direction of the herders and their livestock is ambiguous. The inscription on the statue of Idrimi details how Idrimi acknowledged the suzerainty of Paratana, king of the Hurrian troops, to solidify his reign as king of Alalak. These are all the paragraphs within the public materials from Alalak's site that provide direct evidence regarding Alalak's relations with Mittani. Based on this limited body of evidence, academics frequently assert that Mittani exerted relatively minimal control over the kingdoms it governed, allowing them to engage in their own disputes and foreign relations as they wished, as long as they remained within the empire's sphere. That is an intriguing evaluation. At Alalak, the monarch of Mittani adjudicates disputes about individual citizenship, municipal loyalty, interstate tolls, and personal claims to individuals and property. This indicates that Mittani exercised considerable and exacting control over its vassal states, reflecting a significant level of integration between local and imperial matters. This view is substantiated by the extensive evidence from Arafeh, Mittani's easternmost vassal state, whose distinct geographic context remains pertinent to the western portion of the empire. Documents from Nutsi and Kirkuk confirm the strong judicial and military collaboration between Arafeh and Hanigalbat, Mittani, along with different social and economic connections. The monarch of Mittani could also influence Arafeh's geographical arrangement by redistributing cities among grantees, as evidenced by HSS 9 1.18. Concurrently, MR has provided the sole known sources that mention tribute demanded from a subordinate state by, presumably, Mittani. 4 documents indicate the demand for tribute, arana, on 2 separate occasions, one for each of the succeeding rulers of Imar's first dynasty. The documented tribute was considerable, requiring the liquidation of municipal assets to provide the requisite sums. It cannot be deduced from this limited record whether such tribute payments were extraordinary or regular, nor the schedule on which they may have been required. The lack of information regarding the support necessary from Mittani's vassals may stem from limitations in the surviving sources, rather than a shortcoming in the empire's ability to command resources. Egyptian sources, particularly the inscriptions of Thutmose III, confirm that Mittani, also known as Naharin, could mobilize the Levantine kingdoms under its dominion for warfare. Additional policies. Under Mittani's dominion, individual monarchs governed the territories of Alalak, Arafeh, Kizuwatna, and Tunip. Not all polities within the empire had a king, and the hierarchical relationship between local monarchs and great kings varied among those that did. Governance models distinct from the lord-vassal dyad are seen in the records of Halab, Tolbazi, and Turka. Several unpublished contracts have been discovered among the tablets at Turka, featuring the local king with the Mittanian king. The 2 monarchs and a selection of deities are presented as co-sellers of townlands in oath formulas. The local monarch referenced in these sources, QSV Adu, is mentioned alongside 3 distinct Mittanian kings, Saitana, Paratana, and Sausadatra. The surname represents an alternative spelling of Saustatar, whereas the given name may be a variant of Sutarna, the name of Paratana's predecessor. Regardless of the accuracy of that identification, QSV Adu's reign clearly extended through a succession of 3 monarchs on the Mittani throne during the 15th century. Furthermore, his alliance with the king of Mittani as co-sovereigns at Turka persisted throughout the same duration. Limited information exists to formulate informed hypotheses regarding the characteristics of this relationship or the foundational governance framework, which may resemble that previously employed at Turka. Nevertheless, the evident co-regency of local and overarching monarchs signifies a distinct approach to incorporating local polities into the empire compared to kingdoms such as Alalakh and Arafe. The two tablets unearthed at Tolbazi, the ancient site of Basimru, previously unidentified, indicate that Mittani engaged with a non-monarchical government. One tablet documents South of Tatar's allocation of the town Baidali to the inhabitants of Bas-Iru, Dumu, Mesvi, Urupazi-Ri. South of Tatar authenticated it with his personal seal. The additional tablet documents the conferment of a town to the inhabitants of Bas-Iru by a Mittani monarch, specifically Artatama, I, who affixed South of Tatar's seal to the tablet. The deprivation. The upper right corner of the second tablet indicates the omission of the town name about the grant. Yet the town is delineated with specificity. The town, GN, whose neighbour is the town T, Ru, and whose adjacent neighbours, the municipality, T, U, A, Ab. The town is situated in the Halab district. Artatama has provided to the inhabitants of the town. In both agreements, the king of Mittani engaged with the townspeople, who constituted a polity rather than a subject monarchy. Bas-Iru functioned without a monarch, and its inhabitants depended on collective self-governance, which the Lemashiyasam Ishi they would have implemented through an assembly or other representative institution. Moreover, 26 Mittani could function without a king and without assigning authority to a single official, whether a local leader or a royal appointee. In other words, the empire was capable of exerting hegemony through local collective governance systems and local monarchs. In the instance of Halab, the former capital of a significant kingdom, Mittani established an alternative paradigm. Instead of allowing Halab to continue under the governance of its own monarch, who would likely seek to restore the region's independence and former strength, Mittani restructured it into a district, Hal-Su, overseen by a district governor, Halzog. Li. This initiative appears to have commenced when Mittani seized control of Halab, and the royal family fled during the reign of Ilimilima, the father of Idrimi, circa 1500. The inscription of Idrimi formally designates this event as a Masiktu, signifying bad luck. Due to Mittani's success, Idrimi, in his quest to reclaim his inheritance, was compelled to accept a territory that included portions of Halab's former holdings, excluding Halab itself. Halab was subsequently governed by a Halzog. Li, as evidenced by Alti 101, which dates to the reign of Idrimi's successor Nikmipa. Anwar observed the extradition of fugitives from Halab in the presence of Nikmipa, as documented in Alti 101. Chalzogli of Anwar likely acquired this position by a royal appointment by the king of Mittani. Subsequently, during Tudaliya's reign over Hatti, a king governed Halab once more, as stated in the prologue of the Aleppo Treaty, KBO Vom 6. This document indicates that the king of Halab initially forged an alliance with Tudaliya, thereby betraying Mittani, but subsequently reneged and allied with the king of Hanigalbat, thus betraying Hatti. Consequently, Tudaliya annihilated Halab and its monarch around 1400. 30. Subsequently, during Artatama's reign, Halab became the centre of a district, Hal-Su, rather than a kingdom, as evidenced by the latter of the two Tolbazi tablets. Consequently, Mittani transformed Halab into a province, in contrast to other subjugated polities, supplanting the indigenous governance with what appears to be an administrative system imposed by the overlord. Certainly discontent with this arrangement may explain Halab's choice to ally with Hatti upon Tudaliya's arrival. This idea relies on several pieces of data that do not exclude alternatives when analyzed individually or together. Nonetheless, this may be corroborated by Hatti's caution in refraining from imparting any notions of autonomous kingship to the Hittite viceroy when he subsequently reinstated royalty at Halab via the Aleppo Treaty. The commencement of the pact addresses the renewed friendship between Hatti and Halab by referencing Hattusili III's conquest of Halab 3 centuries prior. This event is regarded as the juncture at which Hatti terminated Halab's great kingship. Consequently, disregarding Mittani's conquest of Halab following Musili II's destruction of it, Halab is perceived as transgressing against Hattusili I, the city's initial conqueror, in subsequent interactions with Mittani, Hanigalbat. This historical narrative was devised to guarantee that Halab would continue to be submissive to Hatti, despite having a monarch once more. The information reviewed indicates 3 methods by which Mittani administered its empire. First, a subordinate state could be governed by its own king, whose allegiance to the sovereign established a relationship akin to that between 2 individuals. Second, a state could achieve self-governance, thereby defining the relationship between its populace and the sovereign. And third, a state could be diminished to the extent that it became a province, severing its political ties to the sovereign by relinquishing its status as a polity. In modifying the initial, or the tertiary paradigm, the local monarch is linked with the sovereign as the co-regent of his realm. In each of these scenarios, Mittanian authority was linked to local authority. This indicated that, for instance, the judicial systems of the subordinate states and the overarching state may collaborate to resolve legal conflicts. The Mittanian authority also governed the allocation of territory and citizenship rights, which will be addressed next. And due to the intermittent nature of light from several sources, it is essential to formulate generalizations based on a singular instance. This approach is ineffective as it conflates conjecture with inference. Aside from its somewhat speculative nature, the depiction above is deficient due to its absence of exact specifics. It is uncertain whether Mittani consistently demanded tribute from the states it subjugated. The 2 instances of tribute payment recorded at Imar may or may not indicate typical requirements. It is evident that certain duties or requirements needed to be executed. However, the examples available do not clarify whether these actions are typical or atypical. For instance, the men going to Mittani from the kingdom of Alalak. The sources from Arafat confirm the supply of Hanigalbatian military forces, Hanigalbatian officials commanding Arafian forces, and Hanigalbatian troops operating in Arafat. These data originate from the concluding period of the surviving archives, the countdown to Mittani's loss of the kingdom. Deriving standard practices from the actions of the past 150 years necessitates further evidence. Egyptian sources confirm that Mittani could mobilize the military forces of its kingdom. However, these sources do not elucidate the methods employed by Mittani to achieve this. Socio-political structure. Our focus on the population, rather than the governmental framework, allows us to grasp the intricate organization of Mittani and its constituent polities. The sources from various regions of the Mittani Empire provide the initial direct evidence of class structure and the inaugural formal definition of citizenship. This revelation, while not implying the absence of these concepts before, significantly enhances our comprehension of Mittani's reign, shedding new light on this historical period. Citizenship. Our research is based on 3 records, each from a distinct location, about the Hanigalbatian status of certain individuals, Hanigalbatutu, in Akkadian. These records, meticulously studied and cross-referenced, provide a comprehensive understanding of the societal structure during the reign of Saustatar, Sultana II, and Tall Brak. The principal area of Mittani originates from the reign of Tushratta, TB 8001. Numerous allusions to the Hanigalbatians are found in texts from Arafat, particularly in the archives at Nuzi. Nevertheless, none of the records address the status of Hanigalbatian. Nonetheless, at least 2 documents discuss property rights or obligations contingent upon residing in Arafat or Hanigalbat, rendering them pertinent to the inquiry of Hanigalbatutu. Although sources on the status of Hanigalbatian are few, their geographical and chronological distribution indicates that they pertain to a broader facet of imperial politics, rather than a singular event in a specific location or period. The ALT-13 and UEM-T1 records in particular are significant as they provide detailed accounts of individuals asserting their Hanigalbatian status and the subsequent legal and social implications. ALT-13 documents Saustata's ruling in the matter of Irip-Hazi, who litigated against Nikmepa, the king of Alalak, asserting his Hanigalbatian status. His assertion was rejected, leading to his reinstatement in the service of Nikmepa. He was deemed a legitimate subject of Alalak rather than Hanigalbat. UEM-T1 indicates that a woman, her children, and a man were elevated to Hanigalbetaan by Gubi, who altered their status in the presence of Sutarna. The individuals who gained from this alteration were evidently his dependents or adoptees. Nonetheless, the connections among those involved remain unspecified. Gubi bequeaths a portion of his estate to the individual reared to Hanigalbatu, and allocates staff to another individual. However, the nature of the relationship between the 2 men remains unspecified. TB 8001 likewise documents one of Yabi's. In Tushratta's presence, he promoted his concubine's son to Hanigalbatian status and granted him property. The alteration in status within the El Mara and Tolbrak documents is associated with the bequest of familial property. This indicates that the beneficiary transitions from a dependent individual lacking property rights to an heir possessing such rights. The benefactor could have executed this transaction independently of local authorities, let alone the king of Mittani, were it not for the necessity of conferring the status of Hanigalbatian upon his dependentee heirs. For the beneficiaries to attain this status, their benefactor must have possessed it himself. However, he could not confer it upon a dependent other than his natural heirs, without securing the king's approval. In each instance, the monarch had to determine if an individual was a citizen of Hanigalbat, which was distinct from being a citizen of a subordinate country, or lacking citizenship entirely. In the case of Irip-Hazi, the monarch concluded that he was not a citizen of Hanigalbat, but of Alalak. The rejection of his claim to Hanigalbatu II necessitated his obligation to perform labor and military service for the kingdom of Alalak. For Gubi's and Yabi's adopted successors, the king's approval of their acquisition of Hanigalbatu II signified that they were obligated to serve the kingdom of Hanigalbat exclusively. Consequently, regardless of the local polity to which El Mara was affiliated, Gubi's heirs, as Hanigalbatians, would not be obligated to render any service to that state. Gubi's heirs and Yabi's heirs, residing in Hanigalbat at Tolbrak, could probably be obligated to serve Hanigalbat. The notion that service is limited to one's citizenship is supported by census statistics and unit rosters from Alalak. Among the thousands of individuals recorded on the existing tablets, dozens or even hundreds are recognized as originating from regions beyond Alalak's domain. However, none is specified as a Hanigalbatian. Simultaneously, citizenship entails both rights and obligations. For instance, Irip-Hazi asserted his identity as a Hanigalbatian, and the dependents of Gubi and Yabi likewise attained Hanigalbat citizenship. This indicated that they were legally safeguarded by Hanigalbat. For individuals adopted as heirs and rendered dependents, becoming Hanegalbatu II, a term that refers to a specific legal and social status, also signified the acquisition of familial assets. This was because citizenship and the obligation to serve the state were contingent upon possessing property rights within the state's jurisdiction. Two legal documents from Nutsi, Gen 328 and HSS 997, implicitly illustrate this aspect. Gen 328 documents the result of a legal proceeding launched by two sons of Tehiptila against one Esvupahali, whose father, Arya, had transferred his field to Tehiptila and had failed to cultivate it. Svupahali, evidently summoned from Hanegalbat, asserts that the claimants shall take possession of the field. The judges affirmed that Tehiptila's sons possessed the field, and stated that Svupahi was exempt from paying the ispiku, the penalty for the yield, of the field due to his residence outside the land of Arafe. The rationale seems to be that Svupahali, having forfeited property rights in Arafe due to his father's alienation of the land, and having relocated to Hanegalbat, is no longer obligated to fulfill any responsibilities regarding his family's previous property in Arafe. By relinquishing property, housing and obligations in Arafe and relocating to Hanegalbat, he has effectively ceased to be a citizen of Arafe, albeit not becoming a Hanegalbatian. The opposite scenario is exemplified in HSS 19:7, the testament of Elia, son of Hapira, a Hanegalbatian living in Arafe, where he commanded armed forces. After enumerating stipulations for his wife, 2 sons and a daughter, Elia asserts that his other 2 sons, Zika and Tamatai, reside in another land and possess no claim to any of his assets. Elia's property is presumed to be in Arafe, while the land where the sons are prohibited from residing is likely Hanegalbat. 39. Consequently, although their family has relocated and obtained property rights in Arafe, Zika and Tamatai have retained their citizenship in Hanegalbat. Thus, they relinquish any claims to the family's Arafian property. Elia was not required to forfeit his Hanegalbatine status while residing and serving as an officer in Arafe. Nevertheless, his sons who did not accompany him were precluded from obtaining citizenship in Arafe. As previously discussed, the sources I consulted prompted me to perceive citizenship as a unique relationship between an individual and the state, encompassing obligations and property rights within the state, typically contingent upon residing within its boundaries. This conception was not novel during the era of the Mittani Empire. The novel concept aimed to provide individuals with more avenues for participation in the Hanegalbat superordinate polity, which now governed numerous minor polities with diverse structures across an extensive region. Citizenship in any subordinate polity was exclusive and contingent upon residence. One could not simultaneously hold citizenship in both Arafe and Kizzuwatna, and obligations to one state or another were determined by one's hometown affiliation. Conversely, citizenship in the subordinate polity could be possessed by individuals throughout the empire, from Arafe to Alalak, yet they were obligated to solely serve Hanegalbat. The Mittanian ruler controlled the attainment of this rank due to Hanegalbatutu's geographical expansiveness and its provision of exemption from service to vassal states. Citizenship in Hanegalbat was more coveted than citizenship in any subordinate kingdom. However, not a waiver from military duty caused this situation. The Hanegalbatians, including Elia, son of Hapira, engaged in combat in Arafe to defend the kingdom against an Assyrian assault, ultimately without success. 42. Although the data from that particular historical period cannot be generalized to the Mittani Empire, the Hanegalbatian citizens made substantial contributions to their kingdom. Formation of classes. The social class systems of Mittani-ruled kingdoms were established and enforced by Mittanian policy, rather than arising from spontaneous evolution. I have advocated for this claim by examining the social class system documented in 15th century Alalakh and juxtaposing it with that recorded in 14th century Arafai. Thus, I assess the evidence and the argument. The archives of Alalakh and Arafai have administrative records that classify citizens into 4 unique categories. Classes may be identified by name or essence in several locations inside and beyond the Mittani Empire. However, analogous records detailing a quadripartite classification of classes have yet to be located elsewhere. Although 2 instances of a phenomenon are insufficient to establish a general principle, the identical class systems of Alalakh and Arafai, situated at opposite ends of the empire, cannot be mere chance. The categories they identified are as follows. The principal segment of the free population consisted of people who held property rights and were obligated to fulfill associated military and labor service responsibilities. The overarching phrase for the service duty was analogous, and hence this class was designated as A-lik, meaning doers of like service in Arafai. The identical class was referred to as A-lik, as in Alalakh. The Hurrian designation was Anusogli, comprising un-us-se, as-ilku, and the occupational suffix og, li, signifying individual who serves. Nevertheless, the prevalent term for this class at Alalakh and other locations was the common Semitic word hupsu, for which the Alalakh texts also utilize an Akkadian equivalent, sabu name, inhabitants of the countryside, peasant. Members of this class served as infantry when summoned for combat. The nobles, elevated above the average populace, possessed the privilege of engaging in combat from horse-drawn chariots instead of on foot. In most of the Mittani Empire, the nobility was called Marian, a term formed by appending the Hurrian derivational suffix nni to the Indo-Aryan word Maria, signifying young man. Conversely, in Arafai, this social class was identified by the Akkadian term rakib narkabti, meaning chariot rider. This distinction underscores that the term Mariani is unrelated to charity. Etymologically, it translates to man, although as a modified loanword, its meaning was not transparent to anyone. Consequently, Marian was employed to signify a distinct class of individuals, the nobility. The class's most notable characteristic was the utilization of chariots in warfare, which finally connoted the word chariot warrior when its application extended beyond Mittani. In addition to the privilege of participating in charity, members of the aristocratic class were exempt from labor service, and some evidence suggests they also enjoyed exemption from debt distraint. The admission of new members into this class was thus governed by local authorities, analogous to the conferral of Hanigalbatian citizenship, overseen by the Mittanian sovereign. A group of destitute individuals differentiated itself from the predominant class of service-rendering, property-owning residents at the bottom echelon of the social hierarchy. In Arafai, this class was called sabu, signifying tenant. In Alalakh, Hana was a Hurrianized West Semitic term, while Eku and Muskenu are Akkadian terms denoting poor. The requirement for membership in this, the class seems to have suffered a deprivation of property rights over land, which the state may potentially remedy, similar to its actions for poor residents who maintained their service responsibilities. Records from both Arafai and Alalakh demonstrate that individuals from the poor or tenant class participated in military service. Consequently, their evident distinction from the usual or analogous group does not imply that they were exempt from similar treatment or categorization. A fourth class was distinguished from the others, consisting of occupational specialists and individuals engaged in the palace, temple, or among the elite. In Arafe, this group was designated as nakose, derived from the root nak, signifying release. In Alalak, it was referred to as egg. Eli, originating from Echel, meaning save, or Suzubu, translating to saved or rescued. The terminology implies that this class may have initially comprised individuals saved or released from debt servitude by a redeemer, who subsequently became their patron or employer. If members of this class benefited from redemption, they did not remain in servitude to their creditors, as they were subject to military conscription as free men. The terms freed and rescued may also denote that this group of individuals was not required to perform labor. Rather, they were anticipated to engage in specialized tasks such as carpentry, metallurgy, equestrian training, or chariot driving. The state aimed to employ specialized labor and maximize citizen enlistment. Hence, it is logical that they utilized debt forgiveness to cultivate a cadre of occupational specialists. Initially, the class was established in this manner. However, it appears to have expanded its membership through increased redemptions and the selection of proficient individuals from the general populace and the underprivileged class, subsequently integrating them into the saved class, reducing their work obligations. A distinct class of occupational specialists emerged at the state's initiative and under its continuous regulation. The above description elucidates the state's function in delineating these classes and their constituents. Evidence from Alalak suggests that the Mariana class of that kingdom was established under Nickmipa's reign by selecting the sons of noble households to form the new class. The available documents do not confirm a rigid structure inscribed on clay in the scribe's style. Instead, they indicate a class development process orchestrated by the administration that employed those scribes. The scribes who performed the census categorized men for service or documented their holdings, fulfilling the state's function of structuring its populace into classes. Mittani's influence is apparent in the method and its implementation techniques, rather than in the sporadic use of borrowed terminology, such as Marianne. If my interpretation of the texts from Alalak and Arafe is accurate, then other policies governed by Mittani should have a comparable four-tier class system, provided their archives are discovered and include analogous records. This paper examines the underlying processes and structures that produced observed events. It is not merely a matter of assembling fragments of knowledge from various sources and completing the gaps. Regarding Mittani, there is an insufficient number of sources to ascertain its timeline, evidenced by the uncertainty surrounding the kingdom's existence before the Amarna period. Nonetheless, the inference methods utilized herein should yield legitimate results when properly applied, irrespective of the quantity of inputs. Some aspects of the Mittani Empire's structure and its links with its policies and populace may have been elucidated. The arrangement of residential areas in the Mittani kingdom reflects various governing types. Examining household environments and the arrangement of residential spaces is more complex than it may seem. Only a few towns have been subjected to comprehensive excavations, and an even smaller number have structures with sufficient surviving materials to ascertain their roles. Archaeologists cannot clarify the principles of spatial organization due to the removal of contents from most abandoned villages. Even with ample evidence, we encounter a fundamental issue regarding spatial interpretation. What insights can buildings' external structures and inventories provide about historical processes, behaviors, and norms? Can domestic environments provide genuine insights into historical policies? The evidence of domestic space about historical policies. While it is generally acknowledged that palaces and official edifices may offer insights into existing political systems, the evidence regarding private residences in this context remains contentious. Houses undoubtedly relate to social structures, but do they also reflect the development of social systems and policies? Indeed, dwellings' design, size, layout, and amenities vary significantly among regions and historical periods. How can we ascertain the variables responsible for the discrepancies? Does ownership of a large house with numerous rooms indicate riches, a sizable family, or political significance? Was it due to technical or environmental factors, such as space, materials, and labor shortages, climatic considerations, the compatibility of architecture with the climate, or economic factors, utilization for manufacture or trade in addition to habitation? Were these elements derived from cultural norms, such as ethnic or regional practices, or from symbolic concepts, such as perceptions of the ideal home? The notion that a residence's design, configuration, and dimensions are intrinsically connected to its function, revealing insights about its occupants, is prevalent. Nevertheless, concentrating exclusively on the structure yields insufficient information, requiring functional evaluations of the house's contents. This type of analysis is laborious, yet significantly more dependable. D.J.W. Meyer articulated the necessity. The superficiality of form as a mechanism for analytical classification is evident, and understanding function is essential. We must get the latter by describing and analyzing each room's contents. A correlation exists between a house's form and function. However, one must first identify the underlying determinants to comprehend this relationship accurately. T. McClellan posited that the varying shapes and sizes of late Bronze Age residences in the studied region could be elucidated by the factors previously articulated by Rappaport, Sanders, and others. 1. Historical processes and beginnings. 2. Physical environment. 3. Economic determinants. 4. Regional political entities. 5. Variations in home structure and size. 6. Ideology. Upon acknowledging these factors, we will examine the frequency with which one dominant explanation cannot be isolated to the exclusion of others. The principal challenge lies in meticulously analyzing assemblages to reconstruct activity zones for subsequent spatial analysis. However, each ancient assemblage has invariably endured varying degrees of decay and destruction due to historical events and physical processes. Consequently, the inventory obtained through excavation, the archaeological inventory, represents merely a fraction of the original contents of the structure, referred to as the systemic inventory. The absent components, such as valuable items appropriated by locals or thieves, and perishable materials like textiles and other organic substances, must be inferred through ethnographic examples and historical texts from the corresponding time and locale. Understanding daily life and society is crucial for extracting information from assemblages regarding activities, participants, and their respective polities. Fortunately, numerous corpora of cuneiform documents from the same era and region exist, particularly about sales or inheritance, which elucidate aspects of daily life and social structures. In the Middle Euphrates region, substantial collections of tablets originate from Meskini, ancient Imar, and Tal Munbaka, ancient Ekalte, while smaller collections are found at Tal Hadidi, ancient Azu, Tal Frey, and Tal Bazi, probably ancient Basiru. Initially, we will analyze the overarching context of the examined domestic residences. Subsequently, we will explore the arrangement of residential space through specific examples. Lastly, we will evaluate domestic space's potential contribution to the workshop's primary theme: the transition from the Middle Bronze to the Mittani period. The frame of domestic space, different models, and governance. The Mittani kingdom were several different government systems within the Mittani Empire. One of them is the palace-based society, which is well attested at Alalak and Ugarit to the west, where the local kings were placed under the overlordship of the rulers of Mittani. The empire's eastern edge employed the same system, with Mittani ruling Arafe under its own king. Simultaneously, the Euphrates Valley was home to collectively governed settlements. In a workshop on collective governance and the role of the palace at the RAI Würzburg 2008, the peculiar structure of the settlements in the area of the Upper Syrian Euphrates was discussed. The elders, the city, and the city's god were particularly strong in this area. 10 further elements of these corporate structures are the so-called brothers, responsible for settling private legal affairs. 11. The Mittani king agreed to exercise hegemony over local monarchs and collective governance polities, accepting the extant social structures. This prompts an inquiry into whether the arrangement of settlements mirrored the diverse governance models within the Mittani kingdom. We shall examine this through selected examples from the western region, Tall Achana, Alalak, and Ugarit, the eastern region, Nuzi, and the central region, Emar, Tal Munbaka, Ek Alte, and Tall Bazi in the Euphrates area. These sites were selected due to their extensive excavations, which provide insight into settlement organization. In contrast, other contemporary sites, such as Tall Sianu, Tall Kazil, Tall Afis, and Tall Twaini in the west, as well as Tall Brak, Tall Fakharia, and Tall Al-Hamidiya in the center, are excluded from this analysis. El Woolley's ancient excavations have revealed a wealth of information about the level IV habitation at Tall Achana, Alalak in the AMQ plain. The excavated section of the village, dating approximately from 1450 to 1350 BC, showcased a prominent official complex near the palace, an adjacent structure, a rather modest temple, and several residences. Recent excavations and magnetic studies have unveiled the vast nature of the dwelling quarters, providing a fascinating glimpse into the ancient past. The structure at Alalak bears a striking resemblance to that of Ugarit, a city that played a pivotal role in the Late Bronze Age. Ugarit's final and most renowned phase occurs toward the conclusion of the Late Bronze Age, specifically the 13th century. The residential quarters of Ugarit will continue to be the standard for Late Bronze Age home architecture in the coastal area, until more information about the settlement and homes of Alalak is made public. This shows how influential they are. The city of Ugarit, encompassing 26.4 hectares, features a substantial royal palace and several smaller residential structures near the western entrance, while the remaining urban area is densely populated with houses organized into quarters and 2 modest temples. The monumental complex of the royal palace and the associated residences, which are 20 to 100 times larger than the neighboring houses, occupy the upper portion of the site. The royal palace is a multifaceted institution that fulfills the living and administrative functions of the court and its diverse associates and staff, while also serving production, storage, distribution, and religious activities. In Nutsi, a vast multi-room palace is next to a walled temple complex, encircled by a dense network of small to medium-sized buildings and larger dwellings. The abode of Prince Shilwateshsup XVI mirrors the palace in its configuration, wall thickness, and the dimensions of several chambers. However, it is comparatively smaller. The measurement was 1,200 square meters, although the palace encompassed nearly 8,000 square meters. The variety of home sizes and the distinct dimensions of the palace, the dwelling of Shilwateshsup, and the other houses reflect the conditions at Ugarit and indicate a highly stratified society. Temples and residential areas constituted the two components of many late Bronze Age towns in the Upper Syrian Euphrates region. Excavations at these sites have not revealed structures that markedly deviate from typical dwellings or temples, which could be construed as a palace or prominent habitation. The pertinent region may remain unexcavated due to the restricted scope of investigations conducted on most settlements. This may be applicable, for instance, in Mesken, the ancient site of Emar, where the excavations conducted by J. Margaron and U. Finkbeiner revealed several sections of residential areas and 3 temples. The twin sanctuary is located in Chantier A, at the city's highest elevation. Temple M2 is in the lower town. The structure found by Margaron at the northern perimeter, described as the palace of the local monarch with a Beit Hilani design, is clearly a residential unit. Nonetheless, the expanse of the walled city of Emar far exceeds the excavated sections, and a substantial portion of Emar will remain unexcavated due to inundation by Lake Assad. Consequently, one can contend that the palace remains uncharted. Researchers have conducted comprehensive studies on Tal Munbaka, also known as Ancient Yakaltum, MBA, or Ekalte, LBA. We have delineated nearly the whole LBA settlement by integrating the excavated region with the geophysical survey area. The city's highest elevation adjacent to the Euphrates contained 3 temples, with a 4th temple located at one of the city gates. The remaining land within the city wall was predominantly occupied by residential quarters. The residences, organized along designated pathways, exhibit a uniform design and purpose. The occult documents indicate that the mayor, Hazanu, and the elders jointly administered the city, alongside the presence of a monarch. W. Mayor identifies the 2 kings referenced in the writings, Ardu-Kabar and Yassi-Ba'la, and his son Zuba'la, as rulers of Emar, and posits that Ekalte was subordinate to the governance of Emar. Nevertheless, due to various historical factors, the monarchs referenced in Ekalte might not have been antecedents of the documented Emar rulers. An additional archaeological argument posits that the sealings on the tablets from Emar and Ekalte are evidently contemporaneous. Another point of disagreement is the palace's mention in a text from Munbaka, number 62, which describes a property deal between the city and the god. 1,000 shekels of silver must be paid to Ekalte's city god Ba'alaka and the palace as a fine. The same tablet features the impression of a seal identified by another tablet as the seal of Yassi-Ba'la, the king. This seal is relatively small, with a simplistic design, typical of private seals. It lacks an inscription, is seemingly not equipped with metal caps, and therefore does not exhibit the characteristics of a royal seal. Compelling evidence suggests that a monarchy and a palace at Ekalte functioned concurrently with the dominant collective institutions. There is insufficient space for a palace inside the entire expanse of Ekalte, unless it significantly exceeds the dimensions of a house. The king's role was confined to being the highest-ranking official among his contemporaries. The monarch of Ekalte resided in one of the mansions, which, if distinct from the others, was merely slightly larger or furnished more elegantly. Could a comparable scenario have occurred in Emar? Multiple documents from Emar indicate that a monarch and a palace were already there from at least the 14th century, preceding the Hittite presence. Contrary to Adam Thwaite's assertion that the palace at Emar was initially erected during the Hittite occupation, the limited kingship of the late Bronze Age king of Emar did not significantly influence property transactions or rights. In his paper, presented at the RAI in Würzburg, he asserted that the king of Emar possessed substantial wealth and authority, primarily due to his significant contributions to the Zukru festival. He refers to the king of Emar as the leader of the town's prominent family. The situation in Munbaka indicates that the palace in the lower town of Emar, now submerged beneath the medieval city of Balis, was likely a substantial residence, potentially one of the largest in the area. The existence of towns such as Emar and Ekalte, which held significant economic and political influence and possessed a monarch and a palace, contradicts the notion that communal administration was mostly confined to smaller or more interdependent villages. The fact that there is only one record of a palace and few references to a king at Ekalte suggests that other nearby sites may have had kings, even though we don't have many written records of them. At Tolbazi, likely referred to as Bas Iru during the Late Bronze Age, the citadel contained a substantial temple, while the lower town comprised multiple districts featuring comparable residential structures. Geophysical surveys and extensive excavations have uncovered significant portions of the city, identifying only residential, industrial, and religious structures. The two tablets that were found don't show that there was a king at Bazi during the Mittani period. This is because the Mittanian kings Saushtatar and Artatama gave land to the sons of Basiru, who were the elders in the eyes of the Mittanian monarch. This demonstrates that collaborative governance extended beyond the lower tiers of the political system, as Liverani asserts. He asserts that communal customs in late Bronze Age Syria predominantly existed in rural regions of a formidable monarchy. The villages in the Euphrates region were economically robust and politically solid entities. They were indeed subjected to external political authority during the late Bronze Age, initially by the Mittani and subsequently by the Hittite ruler. However, this also applies to the other, more stratified societies within the Mittani realm. As mentioned earlier, the evidence indicates that the architectural shape, dimensions, and functions of dwellings may have varied significantly across several regions of the expansive Mittani Empire. Are the disparities solely attributable to the increased functional differentiation within settlements, houses, and rooms in more complex societies, as argued by Kent, or must additional considerations be taken into account? Let us once more compare instances from the western, eastern, and central regions of the Mittani kingdom. In the last phase of habitation, different houses had different ground plans and sizes, because most of them had been changed, rebuilt, and expanded many times, often taking over neighboring plots or buildings. The dimensions of the residences in the Ville Sud, as extensively examined by Olivier Callot, range from 38 to 290 square meters at ground level. 36. However, before amalgamating nearby units into bigger compounds, the initial dimensions of the plots exhibited considerable variation. The function of the dwellings may be inferred mostly from the existing structures. Wells and water drainage systems indicate activities associated with water. Some residences featured tombs beneath the flooring. A staircase ascends to the upper levels. Weights and seals attest to commercial transactions. Remarkably, the ground floor lacked hearths or ovens, although the second floor contained them. Callot posits that the ground level of every residence is utilized not for habitation, but mostly for storage and different private or perhaps professional craft activities. Nevertheless, the inventory did not ascertain the room's uses, therefore exercise caution. Molds for the fabrication of metal tools and weapons were discovered in the residences, and sources also reference ingots from the same district, precise location unspecified. Callot, however, sees the molds as retained but not utilized within the homes because of the lack of additional evidence of metalworking, especially furnaces. Tools such as wooden and flint sickles indicate that the occupants engaged in agricultural practices. Oil extraction, as demonstrated by oil presses, is the sole agricultural activity that has left distinct evidence in the residential areas. Oil production served both subsistence and commercial objectives. Recent excavations of around 12 residences in the city centre provided a more comprehensive list. Nonetheless, the utilization of the ground floor remains comparatively ambiguous. We discovered wells, silos, and water evacuation installations, and we understand that the abundant pottery served both storage and numerous residential functions. It is, however, dubious to claim that the ground floor lacked residential functions, considering the existence of exquisite pottery, jewellery and figurines. Adjacent to the palace were more substantial villas belonging to high-ranking individuals, such as the House of Rapa Nu, the king's scribe, measuring 300 SQM, alongside even more expansive dwellings exceeding 1,000 SQM. Residences at Nutsi. The dimensions of the dwellings, which include substantial walls, with floor area constituting approximately 50%, range significantly from 70 to 416 square meters. Figment 5. The quantity of rooms ranges from 5 to 18. On average, the residences contain 10 rooms, varying in size from modest to large. 43 million. Novak 44, who developed a typology of the buildings, reconstructed the roles of the rooms primarily through the installations. For instance, he designated an area with an oven as a kitchen. However, it appears challenging to advance beyond this point. Novak stated that the 3 excavated residential zones varied in dimensions, architectural style, amenities, apparatus, and households. Disparities in social rank, affluence, and prestige may have influenced these variations. Residences at Tallbazi, Weststadt. It makes sense to look at the functionality of buildings based on the inventory, if ideally the settlement was burned down or quickly destroyed by other disasters, and if a group of modern homes were looked at. We discovered these uncommon situations in Tallbazi's Weststadt. 50 contemporaneous dwellings were excavated, all of which were consumed by fire. Following the completion of the home excavations, Tishreen Lake inundated Weststadt and other areas of the lower town in 1999. Since that time, Tishreen Lake has eroded numerous residences with comparable inventories. They suggest that several hundred dwellings were present in the lower town during the final phase of the Late Bronze Age, Tallbazi. The subsequent text will encapsulate a residence's dimensions, shape, purpose, and household, economic and social activities. The dimensions of the residences. The dimensions of the original plots exhibit minimal change. 90% were measured between 100 and 200 square meters in the initial phase. The standard size of the 50 identified plots ranged from 110 to 170 square meters, with about 60% varying by only 20%, 128 to 159 square meters. We organized the plots along designated streets, measuring them in cubits before their layout and allocation to various households. Throughout the 2 phases, the disparities in house size increased, reflecting the observations of 2 to 3 generations. After Phase 2, the smallest house was 40 square meters, while the largest measured 240 square meters. Economic advancements and inheritance-driven property distribution can elucidate these disparities. Most houses exhibited only minor variations in size, reflecting a well-structured society devoid of significant horizontal stratification. The structure and purpose of the residences. The standardization of the dwellings, along with their installations and movable equipment, facilitated the reconstruction of an idealized normal house and its utilization. It consisted of a lengthy main room bordered by a series of secondary rooms, ranging from 2 to 6, with an average of 4, accessible from the primary room. A stairway ascended to the roof above the main room and to the upper story rooms above the subsidiary rooms. Upon comparing each house to this ideal typical model, we can promptly identify discrepancies in form or function. The ground floor served multiple functions, including food preparation, cooking, baking, brewing, social gatherings, dining, drinking, and household tasks, including spinning, handicrafts, business activities, domestic cult practices, assembly, and access to the roof. The auxiliary rooms predominantly functioned as storage for supplies, containers, instruments, apparatus, and perishable goods. There were supplementary rooms located over the secondary rooms. The roof space above the primary room functioned as an open courtyard for the residents. The detritus from the higher level suggests household activity, including food preparation and storage. What is the correlation between the dimensions of a house and its utility? Examining the residences underscored the necessity of performing a meticulous activity analysis utilizing the inventory. The socio-economic position of a homeowner cannot be inferred from the house's size or the number of rooms, as exemplified by House 29. It is one of the smallest in Weststadt, 97 SQM, and contains only 3 secondary rooms on the ground floor. Nevertheless, the quantity of ceramic vessels suggests a household of moderate size, while the volume and caliber of imported luxury items signify robust economic activity. In contrast to the prevalent practice among several families of meticulously shielding the primary chamber from public view, House 29 was accessed from a high traffic area, including the main road and central square, likely functioning as a marketplace. The economically optimal condition at the central location permitted the modest dimensions of the residence. The amount of individual handicrafts and trade in the ancient Near East, and the degree of organization and control by the palace or state, is a subject of extensive discussion. In multiple residences at Bazi, evidence of artisanal activities was discovered. A blacksmith's workshop in House 20, 54 instances of stone cutting in Houses 1, 5, 28, 31 and 43S, bone and wood craftsmanship in House 25, among others. The activities occurred in the same rooms as domestic tasks, suggesting private handicrafts involving family members. Moreover, little stone weights, likely utilized for weighing silver, discovered in almost every residence and at the central location, indicate private trading and exchange activity among the residents. Social processes, fragmentation of properties due to inheritance distribution. During the second phase, a wall in the main room divided several houses, e.g., House 14, 20, 22, 23, 41, 43, 47. The partition, leading to a decrease in living space, may be construed in several manners, such as a consequence of societal deprivation. However, in several cases, it is clear that the divide resulted from typical social processes. The partitioning of Building 41 resulted in establishing a new altar in the expansive northern section of the building. The most credible theory is that the successor was required to establish a new altar for the deities and ancestors when partitioning the house. Both halves of the residence operated as efficient household units. The southern section was compact, 60 SQM, and contained all essential facilities and equipment, albeit with limited vessels, including several antiquated and repurposed items. The resident possessed complete legal capacity, as evidenced by the weights and cylinder seals in the secondary chamber. Emma's inheritance records show that when the family patriarch died, the oldest son got the main house, Bi-Utu Rabu, complete with its gods and family history. His siblings were given other pieces of land or things they could move. The widow's inheritance comprised valuable artifacts, excluding the primary residence. The writings do not specify her residence, yet it likely was not distant, as the children were responsible for her care until her demise. Occasionally, her right to reside in the house is explicitly stated, or one half of the house is allocated to the widow, with the remaining half assigned to a son. House 41 South likely served as the widow's residence of the previous owner, whilst House 41 North functioned as the main house, where the heir was required to establish a new shrine for the deities and ancestors. Social assemblies and conferences occur in both residences and temples. Certain residences relocated significant domestic functions, from the primary room to an auxiliary room. House 7 is among the earliest and largest residences in Veststadt, encompassing 214 square meters. The primary chamber features a seat along the longer side, 13 mi, upon which a basalt tripod vase rests, with eating and drinking vessels positioned in front of it. The remnants of a bull's skull were located near the altar. The second phase saw the relocation of domestic tasks like cooking, baking, and brewing to the supplementary chamber, where spinning also likely took place. Could the utilization of the main space for ceremonies have resulted in the displacement of women's activities? Certain documents from Emar and Ekalte indicate that the brothers, a public institution with legal authority, resolved private legal disputes. They convened in the residence of one of the brothers, as inferred from the phrases PN, let the brothers enter, or PN, let the brothers sit down. During their assembly, they broke the huku bread and consecrated the table. Numerous justifications exist for situating this assembly within the primary areas of private residences. The principal rooms of most residences included an altar-like table opposite the entryway and a lengthy bench along one side. The bench is evidently designated for seating or resting, as seen by the remnants of animal furs upon it. The exquisite tableware, including jugs and plates, in its vicinity confirms that meals and beverages were partaken here. The altar serves as the household's social, religious, and economic nucleus. Nearby, ordinary vessels bearing food for the ancestors and deities, ritual vessels for libation, figurines, jewelry, and weights were discovered. The configuration, dimensions, and fixtures of a house's main room and a temple's main chamber in the same area exhibit notable parallels. The documents indicate that the city's elders and deities governed the villages. Consequently, scholars propose that the temple served as a communal space for administrative activities, similar to the residences at a lower level. Certain administrative and social roles, potentially delegated to official edifices in the West and East palatial societies, likely occurred within domestic residences and temples. Is there continuity or discontinuity in the evolution of household space in the Upper Syrian-Euphrates area from the Middle to the Late Bronze Age? Late Bronze Age dwellings in the Euphrates region exhibit minor variations between sites. However, the fundamental arrangement remains consistent, with a principal room and one or two rows of ancillary rooms. Has anyone previously attested this form? Or did the Middle and Late Bronze Ages significantly alter it? J. Margaron, who analysed Late Bronze Age Emar as a novel Hittite establishment, believed that the front room homes were imported by the Hittites from Anatolia. As McClellan explicitly illustrated, this shape was already present in the Middle Bronze Age. Researchers identify only a few residences as having MBA levels within the same location. Tall Halawa A, Bauschik II, MBA I, has the most convincing evidence. Excavations there revealed planned residential quarters with a high building density, with about 80 house remnants spread out over an area of about 5,000 SQM. The dwellings, ranging from 25 to 40 square meters, comprise a primary chamber, typically featuring a tanner or a plastered work surface. 2, or possibly 1 or 3, ancillary rooms were accessible from the primary area. Public edifices and defences appear to be absent in the settlement. J. W. Meyer, perplexed by the uniformity of structure and inventory, and the near absence of big storage jars, proposed that a relatively egalitarian population of labourers and their families reliant on a central authority resided in these dwellings. However, one could interpret the Halawa evidence in a completely different way. The structure represents the smaller variant of late Bronze Age dwellings, as evidenced at Tall Frey or Emar, whereas the expanded standard house type replicates this design. This may indicate a minimal hierarchy and robust communal governance in this region throughout the Middle Bronze Age. The excavations at Emar, conducted by U. Finkbeiner and his team, uncovered an uninterrupted succession of household units that endured without significant interruptions from the Middle to the Late Bronze Age. The ground design of the MBA houses remains unclear. However, it is plausible that they mimic the modern residences at the next site, Tall Halawa. The diminutive house type, known as the front room house, may have persisted during the Late Bronze Age, while bigger house forms emerged concurrently, potentially originating from the amalgamation of two front room houses. Certain researchers have construed the variations in house sizes as reflections of the household's social or economic status. The modest residences at Emar have been construed as the abodes of day labourers employed by family enterprises in the larger buildings. However, drawing such generalizations without considering the materials in the dwellings is imprudent. As previously noted, size alone is not a reliable indicator of the homeowner's social status. Rather, factors such as the physical surroundings, economic conditions, and changes in household composition may serve as drivers. It is more persuasive to assert that corporate political frameworks were already robust in the MBA. Daniel Fleming discussed democracy's ancient ancestors in this context. The efficacy of these corporate political organizations was limited when powerful monarchs such as Samsi Adu, his son Yasma Adu, and his successors, including Zimri-Lim in Mari, governed Upper Mesopotamia alongside the rulers of Yamhad in Syria. Following the dissolution of these kingdoms, the communal structures appear to have significantly increased their authority, particularly in the Euphrates Valley. The scriptures lack substantial information, thus rendering the archaeological sources particularly significant. Our knowledge regarding Mari's fate post-destruction by Hammurabi of Babylon is limited. However, at Tolbiya, the ancient Tutul, a notable transformation is evident. Mound E served as the political and administrative nucleus of the city from the early Bronze Age III onward. A succession of palaces constituted a hill of 10 meters in elevation. The final palace was obliterated by Zimri-Lim during the dissolution of the Upper Mesopotamian kingdom of Samsi Adu. During the Late Bronze Age, numerous dwellings were constructed atop the remnants of the final palace, which remains the city's most notable landmark. They resemble the renowned houses of Tall Munbaka, Tall Bazi, and others. The primary significance of Tutul in the Late Bronze Age was its function as the principal cultic centre for the deity Dagan, rather than serving as a royal home. 68. Tutul was situated beyond the boundaries of the Mittani kingdom. Consequently, it is improbable that collective government was notably robust in the Euphrates region, as the Mittanian ruler occupied the role of overlord and prohibited the existence of other kings. The local organizational structures appeared to operate autonomously and exhibited stability. The Mittani state. The establishment of the kingdom of Mittani. In the 15th century BC and the initial half of the 14th century BC, Mittani was a formidable empire, governing an extensive territory that spanned from the Upper Kabur to the Middle Euphrates, and from eastern Anatolia to northwestern Syria. Regrettably, there exists a paucity of Mittanian sources regarding the political structure of this kingdom and its interactions with subordinate kingdoms and polities. Our knowledge of Mittani's early history and the circumstances leading to its foundation is considerably more limited. This compelling subject may captivate this workshop, which focuses on transitioning from the Amorite to the Mittani period. Mittani is first referenced in an Egyptian source, specifically the Theban grave inscription of the state official Amenemhet, who notes his involvement in a military campaign in Syrian land, where the mountain of Emton is mentioned. Amenemhet served under 3 pharaohs, Ahmose IV, Amenhotep I, and Thutmose IV. And it is widely believed that this Syrian voyage aligns with that of Thutmose I, 1493–1483 BC. There is considerable controversy concerning the temporal and historical circumstances of the formation of the state of Mittani. Researchers have advanced and persist in endorsing 2 ideas, each with distinct motivations and rationales. Mittani emerged as a formidable kingdom by the late 17th century, or the early 16th century BC. Hence, its origins predate Thutmose the Son, tracing back to the era of the Hittite rulers Hattusili the Firm and Mursili the Firm. Mittani arose from a political void in Syria, initially caused by the Hittites' annihilation of the kingdom of Yamhad, and subsequently by Hatti's failure to exert control over the region after Mursili Firm's death. The inscription of Amenemhet is thus one of the oldest pieces of evidence indicating that the Mittanian state had emerged as a significant political institution. Our inability to establish a definitive chronology for the Hittite history of the ancient Near East further exacerbates the situation. Wilhelm, Klinger, and Novak, among others, have endorsed the initial hypothesis. This hypothesis mostly, but not exclusively, relies on interpreting specific Hittite manuscripts. The pact between Muwatalli II of Hatti and Talmi Svaruma of Aleppo from the 13th century BC has been construed as evidence of the existence of a Mittani kingdom in the 16th century BC. The historical preamble of this treaty succinctly outlines the pivotal events that influenced the relationship between Hatti and Aleppo. The book initially references Hattusili the Faris, then details the invasion of Aleppo by Mursili the Fais and Tuthalia, Yatushanin. Aleppo's alliance with Mittani precipitated this occurrence. The pact thereafter addresses an assault by Aleppo on Hattusili, king of Hatti. In this context, the text delineates an issue concerning the boundaries among Aleppo, Astarte, and Nuhasi, a challenge initially encountered by the king of Mittani and then by Hattusili. The passage ultimately references Suppiluliuma Ii's capture of Aleppo. Scholars have long disputed this passage, but have not yet proposed a satisfying resolution. The interpretation hinges on the reconstruction of the succession of Hittite monarchs, specifically about the presumed reign of King Hattusili II, who may have ruled between Tuthalia I and Tuthalia II. The existence of the purported monarch Hattusili II is deduced solely from this specific excerpt in the Treaty of Aleppo. No other sources unequivocally mention him. Consequently, numerous experts contend that a king named Hattusili II was non-existent. If the Hattusili king of Hatti referenced in this treaty was Hattusili I, it implies that the kingdom of Mittani existed by the late 17th century BC, or the early 16th century BC. Moreover, the treaty with Talmi Saruma suggests that Aleppo was under the dominion of Mittani before the Hittite conquests under Hattusili the Firm and Mursili the Firm. The pact indicates that the inhabitants of Asftata and Nuhasi solicited territory belonging to Aleppo from the king of Mittani, who acquiesced to their request. Subsequently, the inhabitants of Asvatata and Nuhas appealed to Hattusili, requesting the same areas. In a segment of the Idrimi inscription, that's at 45-51, Idrimi claims that the kings of the Hurrian troops governed his forebears. Academics consider this as another proof of the alleged relationship between Aleppo and the Mittani monarchs during this initial period. The name Mittani is absent from the Hittite sources of the Old Kingdom. The Akkadian version of the Annals of Hattusili, are uniquely references the adversary of Hanigalbat, whereas the Hittite version designates it as the Hurrian enemy. The inclusion of Hanigalbat is perceived as an anachronistic addition from a later period, given the intricate tradition surrounding Hattusili's annals, and the tablet of the Akkadian version is dated to the Hittite imperial age. However, Van Koppen cites two Old Babylonian texts, one from the era of Amisaduqa and the other from the period of Samsuditana, though found in a Neo-Assyrian manuscript. That reference, Hanigalbatian troops. The existence of the geographical or geopolitical term Hanigalbat during Old Babylonian times may elucidate its inclusion in the Akkadian version of Hattusili's chronicles. This method obviates the necessity of ascribing it to a subsequent copyist who modified the text. The reference to Hanigalbat in manuscripts from this period may suggest the existence of a Hurrian state may be linked to the kingdom of Mittani, Hanigalbat. While Hittite records do not expressly reference Mittani, the term king of the Hurrian troops, Lugal Erinmes vi Hurri, is frequently employed to characterize Hurrian kings. This phrase appears in Hittite records from the eras of Hattusili I, Ainsi, and Mursili. Shah Rafain Kabel Thrain, 60 Thrain 13 to 16. 17 Kabel 3, 46, plus 2, 54 to 18, on the Adrimi inscription, and in documents concerning subsequent Mittani kings. Sustained use of this royal title from the 16th to the 15th century BC is regarded as evidence supporting the hypothesis that Mittani existed during the era of the Old Hittite Kingdom. Further evidence supporting the existence of the Mittani state during the Old Hittite Kingdom is the sustained and systematic military opposition by the Hurrians against the Hittites, as documented in Hittite texts from the reigns of Hattusili I and Mursili the Firm. Van Koppen has just reached a comparable conclusion with an entirely distinct approach. In his analysis of Old Babylonian slave sale contracts, Van Koppen observed a significant decline in the number of enslaved individuals imported from northern Mesopotamia during Amisaduqa's reign. He suggests this may reflect the presence of a strong power in northern Mesopotamia. Van Koppen attributes this power to a unified Hurrian polity of unknown dimensions, referred to as Hanigalbat. We now analyze the evidence supporting the second scenario, which posits that the founding of the Mittani polity occurred toward the end of the 16th century BC. The primary and most compelling motivation supporting this hypothesis is that the historical accounts of the monarchs of the Old Hittite Kingdom often reference the Hurrians. Nevertheless, they do not reference Mittani, as previously indicated. These records indicate that Hattusili and Mursili I engaged with numerous polities throughout their military expeditions in Syria, primarily Ursum, Hassum, and Hahum. Aleppo and the Hurrians both endorsed these rulers. The ethno-linguistic designation Hurla or I broadly denotes the Hurrians, whom the Hittites identified as opponents. The term Hurla or I is associated with the ethnic and geographical designation Hurri, which is recorded in Hittite and Akkadian literature and in the Hurrian language. The Mittani letter references the adjective Hurari, signifying Hurrian. It remains uncertain if the old Hittite form Hurla I is a Hattian loanword, as suggested by Soysal, or a Hittite creation. The Hurrians are referenced as allies of Ursvum in the old Hittite account of the siege of Ursum. The Annals of Hattusilium. I document a Hurrian assault that transpired while the king of Hatti was engaged in combat in western Anatolia. The Hurrians presented a threat and resisted the Hittite expansion in Syria during the reign of Mursili the Firm. Nevertheless, these Hittite records do not suggest that the Hittites encountered a cohesive Hurrian coalition. Conversely, 4 Hurrian kings were concurrently present during the events detailed in the old Hittite text. The events outlined in this literature can be chronologically attributed to the period of Hattusili when Hattusili I documented the political and military campaign he conducted in correspondence to Tunip-Tesob, the sovereign of Tikunani. Comprehending its significance necessitates examining the political fragmentation of the Hurrian world, which resulted in contending nations. This letter indicates that the Hittite king agreed with the ruler of Tikunani to jointly assault Hahum, late 1316. Tikunani was situated in the Upper Tigris region, east of Nihria. Hattusili I, encountering challenges in overcoming the resistance of the northern Syrian centers, bolstered by Aleppo, forged an alliance with an eastern Hurrian principality to enable a dual-front offensive against the adversary. The ruler of Tikunani could anticipate territorial or economic benefits from a Hittite victory over the western centers. Salvini has emphasized that the Tikunani documents do not reference Mittani, leading him to conclude that Mittani did not exist then. Miller and Van Koppen contest this assertion. Miller posits that Mittani may have been situated, for instance, in the western Habur, and was primarily expanding westward and eastward, but not along the uppermost Tigris. I find it implausible that during the era of Hattusili, Phrae and Musili II, Mittani could deploy troops as far as Anatolia, while failing to exert political control over the geographically proximate northern regions, such as Tikunani. Moreover, it is implausible to assume that a minor ruler, such as Tikunani, was summoned by Hattusili I to confront a coalition spearheaded by the formidable state of Mittani. Archie 41 has recently asserted that a specific Pisikara of Nineveh and his Hurrian forces assaulted and obliterated Ebla. Archie's theory is founded on Neu's analysis of a segment of the Song of Release 42, a Hittite and Hurrian text that addresses the annihilation of Ebla, and is preserved in 2 temple archives in Hattusa. This composition likely originates from the period immediately succeeding the final phase of Ebla in the Middle Bronze Age. Archie's idea may yield further intriguing hypotheses regarding the extent of Hurrian activities during this period, spanning from the Upper Kabul region to western Syria. This may suggest that the military campaigns of the Hittite monarchs in Syria were connected to disputes among Hurrian leaders from Upper Mesopotamia to western Syria. This compelling hypothesis is based on Neu's interpretation of the fragmentary passage, Kabo chained twand 11-8, where he interpreted the signs at the end of line 8 as pa-sho, the initial form of the Hurrian verb peyai, meaning to destroy. Wilhelms, 2001-85. German translation of this text contradicts Neu's reading. The partially preserved sign is I, not he, indicating that the fragmented verbal utterance is false. It appears more likely that either Hattusili fine, Ebla is referenced in the res gestae of this king, or Mursili. I was accountable for the demise of Ebla. Let us revisit the inception of the Mittani state. Numerous experts contend that the political void established by the Hittites in Syria facilitated the military growth of the Mittani state across significant regions of the territory. The most compelling hypothesis posits that the Mittani state emerged after Mursili the Fundan's reign. Nonetheless, a Hurrian polity that potentially evolved into Mittani in the 16th century cannot be discounted. Concerning the inception of the Mittani state, it is imperative to emphasize that Hittite records from the Old Kingdom do not identify a unified Hurrian political body, as previously noted. Certain manuscripts refer to the Hurrians, Hurla, I, or Hurai, in a general manner, while others specifically identify Hurrian rulers or commanders of the H soldiers. Let us examine the attestations of Hurrian sovereigns in the old Hittite texts and their significance in historical narratives. Kabo thread 60 states that during the reign of Hattusili, Wu, the king, Lugal, of Ilanzura, solicited assistance from the kings of the Hurrian troops. Lugalmes erinmes huri, when confronted by Hatti forces, potentially offering golden vessels in return. The passage is fragmented. This paragraph indicates that Ilanzura solicited aid from Hurrian chiefs, referred to in the text as kings, in return for Gogol. The account of the siege of Ursum illustrates that the city of Ursum, although besieged by the Hittites, maintained communication with its allies. Its supporters were Aleppo, the city of Zalwar, Zarwar, Hurrian soldiers, and Zupa. The Hurrians referred to their messenger who arrived at Ursum as the servant of the son of the storm god. The messenger proclaimed, "I have amassed these quantities of silver, garments, oxen, and sheep, which I will bestow upon the Hurrian troops." Scholars have analyzed the phrase son of the storm god in this context, positing that it denotes the king of Mittani, despite the absence of supporting evidence. This identical expression appears in another section of the siege of Ursum. It conveys the following information to the king of Hatti. Revna 7:8. The sons of the son of the storm god are contending for kingship. This excerpt seems to reference either a conflict concerning the dynastic succession of the sons of the Hurrian ruler, an ally of Ursum, or a confrontation among Hurrian leaders. The res gestae of a Hittite king from the Old Kingdom, perhaps Mursili the Firm, and its duplicates indicate that the deities aided Hatti when the Hurrians were poised to seize control of the city of Hurma. This period was significant in the conflict between the Hittites and the Hurrians. The deities disseminated a contagious illness among the Hurrians, Hurla, resulting in their demise. Nipa Tuzias, lord of the army, has died. Likewise, Karawani, Parayuna, and Ayukteraya, all lords of the army, have all perished. Cunha has indicated that 61 ancient Hittite documents demonstrate that the southeastern Anatolian and Syrian polities targeted by the Hittites might anticipate potential salvation alone through assistance from Hurrian forces. The presence of numerous Hurrian kings, as recorded in Kebo III, and the application of diverse titles for Hurrian leaders, indicates that the Hurrians who participated in military conflicts against the Hittites did not belong to a unified political organization. Rather, they were likely rulers of distinct Hurrian polities or commanders of mercenary Hurrian forces, as demonstrated by the compensation of gold or other commodities to these troops. See Kebo III and the account of the siege of Ursum. Van Koppen has demonstrated that during the reign of King Samsu-Iluna in Babylon, evidence indicates the pivotal involvement of substantial mercenary forces in mediating interstate conflicts in northern Mesopotamia. The emergence of displaced individuals from the Zagros and other regions may elucidate this relatively recent phenomenon. Duran 63 posits that the groups, Erinmes, of Habiru, enumerated in the Prism of Tikunani, as published by Salvini, were refugees originating from Hahum, compensated by Tunib Tessob, the king of Tikunani, to engage in hostilities against Hahum. Consequently, this document elucidates the formation of militias utilized by states and polities during conflicts in this era. The disputed circumstances arising from the incessant Hittite operations in Syria may have popularized the utilization of mercenary forces, hence enabling the establishment of militarily formidable factions. The initial phases of the Mittani state may be situated within this framework. The designation King of the Hurrian troops by the rulers of Mittani clearly emphasizes the significance of military strength within the political framework of this empire. The etymology of Mittani, as recently demonstrated by Wilhelm, signifies the land of Ma'ita, associating the name of this region not with a geographical locale or an ethno-linguistic group, but rather with an individual, presumably one of the earliest and most significant rulers. This appears to support the theory that the rise of Mittani is linked to a military leader's acquisition of civil authority. The notion that military operations, army strength, and the presence of military leaders were significant in establishing a unified Hurrian state does not imply that Indo-Aryan groups instigated this process. Secondary literature regarding the Hurrians frequently supports the hypothesis that Mittani's political and military achievements are attributable to a dominant faction of Indo-Aryans. I concur with von Dasso's recent arguments that challenge the heroic perspectives of an Indo-Aryan presence in Mesopotamia. There is no definitive connection between the notion that Mittani was a Hurrian political entity governing all of northern Syria and the assertions that the Mittani royal dynasty utilized Indo-Aryan language and culture. One of the eastern Hurrian principalities, potentially the progenitor of the Mittani, and possibly located near Upper Kabur, may have emerged as the most dominant authority in the region for reasons unrelated to their Indo-Aryan affiliations. However, these causes must remain ambiguous due to this period's absence of literary records. Other Hurrian states, such as Tigunani, may have existed in Upper Mesopotamia. However, their interactions with Hatti and Babylon are unknown. The nature of the Kassites' relationship with the Hurrian polities and the repercussions of Mursili-Tharm's incursion into Babylon are unknown. The devastation of the kingdom of Yamhad and the obliteration of numerous Western Syrian rulers likely enabled the ascendance of a formidable Eastern polity, presumably one that had already secured dominance over the Upper Kabur region, and had not depleted its resources in confrontations with Hatti. Restricting the importance of the Indo-Aryan element in the origins and development of the kingdom of Mittani does not suggest that we intend to refute the fact that the rulers of Mittani possessed Indo-Aryan names. The persistence of this tradition throughout the Mittani dynasty's history indicates that they regarded the use of Indo-Aryan names as a distinctive and significant aspect of their culture. Adopting Indo-Aryan names is a primary or secondary characteristic of the kingdom of Mittani. The etymology of Maita is ambiguous, hence this name offers no discernible hint. The earliest known Mittanian king with an Indo-Aryan name is Sutarna, suggesting that the practice of adopting Indo-Aryan names may have originated with him. However, the scarcity of information regarding this era of Mittanian history and Sutarna's rise to power precludes any definitive conclusions. Sutarna's name is exclusively documented on a seal imprint from the reign of Soshtata. Several Turka records and the texts Alti 13 and 14, which consist of 2 tablets documenting royal decisions in legal matters, were sealed with it. This is contingent upon Saitana being an alternative spelling of Sutarna, as suggested by Ruold. In recent years, the sources pertaining to Mittani have expanded due to discoveries at Imar, Tol Brak, Tol Bazi, El Mara, and Terka. The renewed excavations at Tol Fakharia raise expectations for additional information on Mittani, enabling a more precise study of this state's early history in the future. The initial Hittite kingdom. The Assyrians' incursion into Anatolia 50 years after the conclusion of the Ur-3 period was a significant historical event. This, together with the establishment of merchant colonies in or near local urban centers, facilitated the introduction of cuneiform writing to Anatolia. The commerce evolved, establishing more colonies and trading stations, which ultimately created a hierarchical structure with Karam Kanes at the apex. The records of the old Assyrian merchants include several thousand texts and enumerate various locations throughout Anatolia. Several incomplete treaty tablets have revealed that local rulers employed old Assyrian scribes for their own objectives in recent years. These treaties delineate the overarching agreements between the Anatolians and the representatives of the Assyrian merchants, establishing different restrictions for commercial dealings. The local authorities possessed the authority to levy taxes on caravans traversing their domains, and in return, they conferred upon the Assyrians the privilege of self-governance, provided safety, and ensured unobstructed passageways. The numerous letters, legal documents and commercial transactions discovered in the Karams and Abortus, primarily in Karam Kane's 5e, but also in other cities such as Hattusa, typically pertain solely to trade-related issues, expenses and taxation, transportation challenges, and similar topics. It is alone within this framework that we gain insight into the trade backdrop, its influence on Anatolia's politics, and the interactions between Assyrian traders and local rulers. The poem primarily avoids discussing politics, war, or significant historical events. Nonetheless, it suggests that roads were obstructed, travel was halted, and there was widespread unrest due to conflicts among local officials. The Assyrian writings reference multiple local Anatolian kingdoms termed Matu. During the Karam II period, the political landscape appeared relatively stable, allowing merchants to do their activities without obstruction. Ultimately, the devastation of level 2 of Karam Kane's Fai must have resulted from a military conflict in Anatolia. The increase in trade may have prompted local rulers to compete for territory. Due to trade rules, it is reasonable to infer that boundaries and the awareness of distinct areas grew progressively. Significantly, the greater the number of cities with Assyrian colonies under an Anatolian prince's power, the more he would benefit from trade. Conversely, only autonomous rulers could independently engage directly with a trade colony. The Assyrian texts depict a stark representation of the political landscape in central Anatolia during the 18th and early 17th centuries. However, we can enhance this depiction by utilizing a significant document from the Hittite archives that pertains to historical occurrences predating the establishment of the Hittite kingdom. The renowned Anita manuscript in the Hattusa archives has 3 versions in the Hittite language, an Old Hittite original and 2 subsequent copies. The work delineates events from the period of level Ib of Karam Kane's V in a distinctly historiographical way, unparalleled in the tradition of old Assyrian writings. Whether it is a translation from Akkadian, Old Assyrian, or Old Babylonian to Hittite or an original composition in Hittite remains uncertain. This uncertainty adds to the intrigue and mystery surrounding this important historical document. The poem addresses the conflict of the Kusara royal dynasty, including Pithana and his son Anita, for dominance over a significant portion of central Anatolia. Consequently, with the conquest of multiple adversarial cities, notably Canes, Nasa, and Hattusva, Anita asserts the title Rubam Rabam. The Hittite language corresponds to the title Lugal.Gael, meaning Great King, has been the customary designation for Hittite monarchs since Hattusili. Pithana and Anita are documented in Assyrian literature from the colonial period and are authentic historical characters in Anatolia. Nonetheless, Pithana's domination of Canes cannot be equated with the conclusion of level Ib of the Karum, as he is documented as the ruler of Canes in no fewer than 3 records from level IB. His son succeeds him and is documented in Cain Savi and Amkua, a prominent city in later Hittite records. Despite an amazing pedigree of over 5, if not 6, rulers of Canes, it remains hard to compose a comprehensive history of this era. C. Michel has identified a singular chronological connection between level Ib and the history of Mesopotamia. This is due to one of the Ib writings referencing a Naima Kubi, believed to be identical to a Nim Werakubi from Tol Leilan, who is associated with Yakunastar, the final ruler of Tol Leilan. Samsu-Luna subdued Tol Leilan in his 23rd year, corresponding to 1728 BC, while Karam Kanesh, level IB, was likely obliterated in a military confrontation circa 1720, as indicated by a new eponym list. This event signifies the conclusion of written records in Anatolia until the emergence of Hittite archives, marking a dark age in Anatolian history. Notably, the Hittite legend indicates a relationship between Anita and Anum-Herbe, referenced in a letter from the Old Assyrian period, composed during the reign of a king named Inar in Canes. Inar was probably the king of Canes before Pithana, the father of Anita, who seized the city. According to the Mari texts, Anum-Herbe appeared to dominate most of the political landscape in southeast Anatolia and northern Syria during the 18th century, encompassing cities such as Zalpar and Hasu. Clearly, Anatolia's history includes a heritage of empire building, albeit modest empires, and this quest for dominance has significantly influenced the region's political landscape. However, to our knowledge, none of the kingdoms in Anatolia has sufficient strength to extend their political influence into northern Syria or Upper Mesopotamia. This occurred initially with the establishment of the Hittite kingdom in Anatolia. Although early Hittite history lacks extensive written documentation, there exists an exception. For Hattusili the Firm, one of the earliest Hittite kings, though this remains a subject of debate, there are several political or historical texts and 2 nearly complete tablets of his annals and purported testament. Both versions are composed in Akkadian and Hittite. The textual tradition presents challenges. We possess a tablet containing the Akkadian rendition of his annals, potentially from the Old Hittite era, a Hittite variant from a 13th century copy, and several fragments from various late copies. The original version remains indeterminate. The annals suggest that Hattusili conducted campaigns solely during the 6 years of his reign. Nevertheless, it is unfeasible to chronologically situate these 6 years within his kingdom, due to the absence of references. The text may be merely a selection of significant events, or a compilation of literary summaries or fragments from a more extensive tradition. The ramifications of reconstructing historical events are evident. Obtaining a coherent understanding of the sequence of campaigns and chronological specifics is challenging. Additionally, there are issues with a second significant document, his purported testament, which solely addresses the conflicts within the royal family and the disputes regarding the rightful heir to the throne. These conflicts involved numerous family members and were unrelated to other historical occurrences or military actions. The tablet's subscript suggests it was composed shortly before the ruling king's demise. Nonetheless, the various occurrences detailed in the text likely correspond to different eras throughout Hattusili I's rule. Determining the extent of Hittite knowledge of the physical and political landscape of the Trans-Taurus region in northern Syria and Upper Mesopotamia during the era of the early prominent kings, such as Hattusili and Mursili, has proven challenging. A primary reason for this is the exceedingly terse form of the chronicles of Hattusili. The annals of Hattusili frequently reference geographic names, primarily cities, but occasionally include rivers or mountains, without offering any contextual information. The spellings occasionally vary considerably from other writing traditions, such as Old Assyrian or Mari writings. The temporal order and spatial distribution of the recorded incidents are frequently ambiguous, and the reconstruction of the campaign itinerary remains provisional in many instances. Simultaneously, during its early years, the Hittite writing tradition demonstrates a pronounced interest in various literary forms and textual structures within ritual, religious texts, and historiography. Certain texts illustrate the potential for articulating intricate events or acting discursively, yet the annals did not employ these strategies for unknown reasons. Hattusili's endeavors in the conflict against the dominant forces of northern Syria were significantly more comprehensive than the scant details documented in his chronicles suggest. Accepting that he campaigned for merely 6 years during his tenure is also challenging. Several brief writings regarding the conflict between Hittite and Hurrian forces in northern Syria indicate the existence of a substantial corpus of literature on this historical event. These texts pertain to the Syrian conflicts engaged in by Hittite monarchs at the inception of their history. Regrettably, the deplorable state of these writings renders it unfeasible to reconstruct the evolution of these disputes or ascertain the exact dates of these occurrences. Hattusili's battles in Syria, targeting the kingdom of Yamhad and the Hurrian stronghold of Mittani or Haniga, may have impacted Mursili's endeavors. Even scattered information corroborates the existence of the kingdom. Given Yamhad's dominion over the majority of the region, it is reasonable to infer that he and the Hurrians collaborated. We shall revisit this matter subsequently. Notwithstanding these challenges, we can still assemble the disparate fragments of information from various sources to ascertain the expansion of Hittite territory from Hattusili's initial campaigns in the Trans-Taurus region to Mursili's incursion into Babylon. From Alala and Zalpar to Halab, Ebla, Emar, and Carchemish, the majority of the prominent centers of the old Babylonian world in northern Syria are referenced in Hittite texts. Several names are referenced primarily in the records of Hattusili the Firm. However, some are challenging to identify or accurately locate. This discussion will concentrate solely on several prominent cities and centers in the east from a Hittite perspective, omitting inquiries into the historical geography of Anatolia due to our limited understanding, as we are largely unable to identify most of the reference locations, with few exceptions. The circumstances are intricate about the city referred to as Zalpa, Zalpa, or Zalwa. One city named Zalpa exists in the Hittite literary corpus, specifically the northern Anatolian city, which we can temporarily disregard. It may correspond to the ruins unearthed at Ikistepe, at the Kızılırmak estuary, into the Black Sea. However, there certainly exists at least one, if not two, more cities named Zalpa within the Hittite tradition, situated in a more southeastern orientation. The orthography of this name, or possibly names, exhibits notable variation. The Hittite rendition presents Za al-Pa, while the Akkadian version records it as Za al-Ba'a in the Annals of Hattusili, both referring to the identical city. Additionally, the spelling Za al-Pa appears in fragment KUB 3699, referencing Anum-Hirbi. The variations in spelling between the Akkadian and Hittite renditions of Hattusili's annals suggest that Zalpa may denote Zalbar in other Hittite texts. Numerous texts from Mari reference Anum-Hirbi as the sovereign of Zalbar. This is evidently the same Anum-Hirbi referenced in Hittite history, and Zalbar is distinct from the cities in Mari, which is consistently denoted as Zalpa. Zalpa is situated adjacent to the Bali River. With this identification, it appears evident that the term Za al-Pa'ar, documented in the Tikunani letter of Hattusili the Firm, as well as the Za al-Pa in the Edict Kabo 327, which I will revisit later, refer to the same city of Ain Empire. Lastly, although not pertinent to this discussion, the Özvu text contains the name Eru Ar, which may be construed as an error for Zaru Ar. Zalbar of Anum-Hirbe is situated beneath the Amanos mountain range, in the west, distant from the Euphrates, in contrast to the other Zalpa. This pertains to whether the Zalpa referenced in the edict alongside Hasu and Halaband is identical to the Zalpa that was never governed by Sam Sa'adu. It appears quite probable that Zalpa is synonymous with the city of Zalpa, which Hattusili the Rai purportedly annihilated during his prior Syrian campaign, as documented in multiple texts, his annals, the edict, and potentially the Tikunani letter. It appears improbable that he arrived at the Bali with his forces during the initial stage of his Syrian battles, allowing formidable adversaries to remain unchallenged on his sides. Marazi and Folanini suggest that Tilman Hoyuk could be a viable contender for the Zalpa of Anum-Hirbe In the second year, as recorded in his annals, Hattusili III advanced against Alala and obliterated the city, which likely marked the end of Alala VII. Continuing the battle, Hattusili attacked Ursu, but only succeeded in devastating the surrounding plains, not the city itself. In subsequent years, Hattusili the Khwarizm did not penetrate northern Syria, as per his annals. In a battle against the Azawa territories in Western Asia Minor, the Hurrian enemy, possibly a coalition of Halab and Hanigalbat or Mittani, assaulted the Hittites in their native region, isolating the Hittite monarch. For unspecified reasons, the Hurrians refrained from annihilating the Hittites, allowing Hattusili I the opportunity to reconstruct his Anatolian empire in the subsequent years. Ultimately, he initiated a second campaign against fortifications across the Taurus mountain range and re-entered northern Syria, initially confronting the city of Hassu, potentially situated at Gaziantep. Hassu was a significant ally of Halab, a prominent political center in northern Syria. Typically, both cities are referenced collectively in these early Hittite records. Halab dispatched forces to assist Hassu against the Hittite army. However, Hattusili ultimately defeated these allied troops, advanced directly into Hassu, and subsequently ravaged and annihilated the city. His subsequent objective was Hahum, which the Hittites also ravaged and annihilated. This may have been the circumstance in which Hattusili III was bestowed a silver chariot by the monarch of Tikunna. Based on the new information from the Tikunani letter, it remains plausible to consider that Hahum is identical to Lidar Hoyuk. An ancient Assyrian document indicates that a city named Hahum was situated along a main commerce route between Kanis and Nihrija. The area surrounding Samsat is more credible. Nihrija is referenced in the Tikunani letter, whereby Hattusili I commands Tunip-Tesub of Tikunani to assault Hahum from one way, while the Hittites advance on the city from the opposite side. The geographical framework we can rebuild from this information, derived from many sources, is relatively obvious. However, the most intriguing and challenging aspect is the localization of Tikunani itself. Hattusili addressed his servant Tunip-Tesub, stating, "Tikunani is my city, you are my servant, and your territory is my territory." Can we entertain the notion that, is it possible for me, Hattusili, to exert political dominion over a territory distant from Anatolia? What prompted Tunip-Tesub to acknowledge a Hittite monarch as his sovereign? The records indicate that the monarch who dispatched the silver chariot to Hattusili was Tunip-Tesub from Tiku-Tikunani. If this is accurate, it may suggest a Zweckbündnis political coalition that is advantageous for both parties, representing an optimal scenario for a formal treaty. Nevertheless, the oldest treaty document known from the Hittite archives dates only to the Old Hittite period's conclusion, although a few minor fragments may be somewhat older. I contend that two distinct phases can be identified in the political strategy of the founder of the Old Hittite Empire. When Hattusili I initially engaged in the political arena of northern Syria and the established urban centers, it appeared that the Hittites were solely focused on plunder. The Hittites targeted cities along a specific route. If they were sufficiently swift, they could seize the city. Otherwise, they devastated the surrounding hinterland and continued searching for another opportunity. Following his initial triumph, the following year, Hattusili would focus his efforts on the far west against Azawa. He was utterly astonished by the response of the authorities in northern Syria. It appears that Hattusa and the Hittites endured merely by happenstance. However, Hattusili was evidently able to derive lessons from this event. He reinstated his dominance over central Anatolia and the surrounding regions, establishing a robust foundation for the resurgence of Hittite military strength. Upon his second entry into northern Syria, he appeared to possess significantly greater knowledge of the political landscape, and perhaps he adhered to a strategic blueprint aimed at dismantling Halab, the epicenter of the Yamhad kingdom and the final vestige of imperial authority from the old Babylonian era. Although Hattusili did not secure victory against Halab itself, he subdued some of its allied cities and significantly diminished Halab's status as the preeminent force in the region. It can be inferred that Hanigalbat, Mittani, could not direct the Hittites to the obstacles. However, the inquiry we must pursue is why, after generations, a local Anatolian sovereign was sufficiently powerful to traverse the mountains oppositely and challenge the established political authorities. What factors contributed to the Hittites' greater prosperity under Hattusili compared to other Anatolian monarchs, given that old Assyrian merchants had penetrated Asia Minor centuries earlier? What information do we possess regarding the political structure of the old Hittite kingdom? Treaties or directives, the most reliable sources for this information, commence later, yet we possess some papers that concentrate on the political landscape during the early years of Hittite history. Initially, a fragment of an old Hittite document, Kabo 327, is commonly referred to as an edict. Most preserved texts address the Hittite king's familial conflicts, particularly concerning his son and daughter. Although his name is not specified, it is evident that Hattusili is referenced. He exiles both individuals, compelling them to reside away from the Hittite capital's court. The repercussions for the proponents of these schemes against the reigning monarch, orchestrated by members of the royal family, were significantly more severe. Their throats were slit, and the corpses were displayed at the palace gate. The paper pertains to the heir apparent, presumably Mursili. The young grandson, Hattusili, assumed it in place of his granddaughter. The book was composed during the final years or months of Hattusili's rule, as it is clear that Hattusili acknowledged his insufficient time to achieve his political and military objectives in northern Syria. Nevertheless, unable to forsake his ambitions to conquer Halab, he devised a strategy and communicated it to his successor. The man of Zalpa disregarded the father's command. Observe now, Zalpa. The guy of Hasviasvu disregarded the father's words. Observe now the Hasviasvu. The man of Halap disregarded the father's warning. Halap is destined to perish. H was the final remaining adversary of the Hittites. The text from Hattusili I referenced is significantly more renowned than this fragment. This paper, referred to as his testament, is directed towards the appointed heir to the throne. In contrast to the military triumphs overseas, it discloses the challenging circumstances within the royal family, highlighting the rebellion of his sons against the reigning king. The recipient of the text is the successor to the throne, his grandson Mursili, and it contains ethical or moral counsel for the youth. Through his testament, Hattusili endeavored to resolve the situation by legally designating Mursili as his heir. Hattusili provides him with guidance, which is anticipated to transform the youthful and inexperienced individual into a successful ruler, provided he follows the counsel of his predecessor. The specific mechanics of the rule are not delineated. However, the prescribed treatment of the monarch towards his sons, other royal family members, bureaucrats, and nobility implies a sort of authoritarianism that Max Weber terms patrimonial Herrschaft. The ruler's legitimacy derives from his lineage and divine acknowledgement. The old Hittite composition Qub 29.1, a significant text for Hittite kingship ideology, characterizes the king as one to whom the gods have delegated Manijah High rule, or government, over the territory. As Manijah Tala, he serves as the deputy or administrator of the storm god, the land's proprietor, and of the sun goddess, the land's progenitor. The monarch's sons constituted an oligarchy, serving as deputies of the monarch and deriving their authority from their direct lineage to the sovereign. Their allegiance to the sovereign was the fundamental component of the autocracy. The fundamental component of an oligarchic organization relies on familial connections. Authority interactions were depicted via human relationships. It may be challenging to assert that religious literature rooted in indigenous Hattian traditions accurately represents the proper conduct of a Hittite ruler, as these concepts are absent from any historical or political documentation. This document introduces the Panku, a contentious institution of the Hittite state, comprising high-ranking officials and royal family members. The CHD characterizes Panku as the entirety of the king's entourage serving as an advisory and admonitory body. The precise roles designated to this institution, which the king must consult in specified instances, are ambiguous. There are no definitive signs that the king's authority was constrained by the Panku. Yet, it can be inferred that during these earliest years the Panku may have served to promote continuity and stability. The transfer from Hattusili to Mursili, despite occasional tensions within the royal family, appears to have occurred without additional disruption. Some contend that this was due to a regent who wielded royal authority. However, certainty eludes us. There exists a limited corpus of texts from the era of Mursili, or those referencing his reign. However, it appears that the political climate in Hatti was tranquil, suggesting that Mursili may have been compelled to reinforce the Hittite kingdom's authority in the regions previously conquered by Hattusili. Mursili perpetuated the policies of his predecessor via military assaults against Yamhad and its capital, Halab. The Hittites needed the conquest of Halab to exert substantial influence in northern Syria. Although the outcomes are evident, sources on Mursilis's military endeavors are scarce. It is well recognized that Halab was not the sole old Babylonian dynasty that the Hittite ruler extinguished. Regardless of his motivations, he persisted with his military campaigns and departed for Babylon, the capital of the Mesopotamian realm, as stated in the proclamation of Telepinu. He then advanced to Babylon, obliterated the city, vanquished the Hurrian forces, and transported the captives and treasures of Babylon to Hattusa. Although the Hittite texts do not reference the Babylonian ruler by name, it is evident that Mursili terminated the first dynasty of Babylonia during the era of Samsudistans. The Babylonian Chronicle indicates that the Hittites advanced upon Akkad. The military campaigns of Mursili became deeply ingrained in Hittite memory, as evidenced by a prayer by his namesake, Mursili II, dating to the 14th century. Historically, Hatti, supported by the sun goddess of Arinna, would mercilessly subjugate the neighboring territories. Furthermore, they devastated Aleppo and Babylon, seized the silver, gold, and deities from various territories, and presented them before the sun goddess of Arinna. What objectives did the Hittites aim to accomplish with these activities? It appears highly unlikely that Mursili intended to maintain enduring dominion over the Babylonian Empire. Most Hittite scholars believe that Mursili's conquests yielded no enduring advantages, and that his primary objective was to demonstrate his legitimacy as the genuine heir to the founder of the early Hittite state. I am uncertain that this is indeed accurate. The knowledge of the circumstances after Mursili's return to Hattusa and the subsequent years after his assassination by his brother-in-law Hantili is very fragmented. Hantili appears to have had an extensive reign and was very active. In one of his Syrian battles, he arrived at Carchemish and the Euphrates, engaging a coalition of Hurrian forces. 32 years later, Amuna, the progeny of Hantili, engages in combat with Hahum along the Euphrates and Arzawa in Western Asia Minor. Unlike the extensive influence of the Hittite kingdom, the Telepinu proclamation characterizes Amuna's reign as a period of turmoil and increased violence within the royal family. Only after Telepinu ascended to power could he halt the fall and bloodshed, even via tolerance measures against the usurper and his accomplices. A significant chunk of this narrative is simply propaganda. Despite the limited information regarding the Hittite history between Hattusili I and Telepinu, and the frequent instability within the royal family and succession conflicts, nearly every Hittite king successfully traversed the Taurus during this period of over 100 years. The Hittite military maintained significant influence in southwest Anatolia and northern Syria, seeing no substantial adversary until a formidable Hurrian state emerged with a monarch in Wasukani. In the declaration of Telepinu, the Panku comprises a substantial assembly of officials, predominantly engaged at court, the palace servants, the cupbearers, and the tablemen, among others, including the king's personal guards. However, shortly thereafter, beginning in the Middle Hittite period, a new textual type emerges, the so-called instructions. These are regulations for various categories of officials with military or administrative experience. As this genre emerges, the Panku as a political or administrative entity vanishes from the literary records. This may indicate a comprehensive reform of the Hittite state's administration and military frameworks. We learn about a distinct administrative system for regional districts and border areas. The onset of the struggle with the Kashkains coinciding with its introduction may account for the absence of any discernible immediate impact from these measures. Conflicts arose within the royal family once more, leading to the usurpation of the throne by Muwatalli, who was subsequently assassinated by two members of the court. The political circumstances between Telepinu I and Tutkalia remain unclear. However, these changes positioned the Hittite kingdom advantageously for future developments. At this juncture, Tutkalia re-entered northern Syria, engaged in combat with the Hurrian Empire of Mittani, the preeminent force of the era, and initiated the ascendance of the Hittite Empire. Suppiluliuma vanquished the Hurrians 2 generations later, driving the Mittanian kingdom beyond the Euphrates. Through the administrative structuring of the conquered land, the establishment of the kingdoms of Karkamis and Halab, and the implementation of vassal treaties alongside various reforms and reorganizations, the Hittite Empire emerged as the preeminent power for over a century. The political and cultural landscape of the 3rd millennium. The political and cultural landscape of Syria and Upper Mesopotamia in the 3rd millennium, regions governed by the Mittani state since the 16th century BC, remained mostly obscure until slightly over 30 years ago. This resulted from excavating just a few sites and the paucity of epigraphic and archaeological evidence, rendering its history predominantly obscure. Commencing in the early 1980s, our understanding expanded significantly due to excavations at the various sites of Syrian Jazeera and the discoveries of literary sources from Ebla, Tall Baydar, and Tall Mozan. The geographical scope of the Ebla writings is extensive. They provide insight into the political and cultural landscape of the expansive region of Syria and Upper Mesopotamia during the Edi-Iib period of the 3rd millennium. Political milieu during the era of the Ebla archives. The reconstruction of the geographical scope of the Eblate kingdom, encompassing its constituent, confederate, and conquered territories during the period recorded by the Royal Archives, 24th century BC, is a daunting and ambitious endeavor, and research on this subject will remain in progress for an extended duration. The geopolitical context is recorded in administrative documents, correspondence from other monarchs engaged in economic, political, and diplomatic contacts with the kings of Ebla, and the wording of an international contract regarding Ebla's trade with the city of Abbasal which maintained its own commercial network. Archaeological evidence demonstrates the Eblaite kingdom's interactions with foreign nations and long-distance commerce. All the writings unequivocally indicate that the Eblaite monarchy had a comparable geographical expanse to the Mittani dynasty. It encompassed kingdoms distant from Ebla, including Kisvi in central Mesopotamia, Hamazi east of the Tigris, Assur, likely on the Tigris, Gasur, possibly east of the Nagar in Upper Mesopotamia, Mari on the Euphrates, Armi Armanum on the Euphrates, and potentially Tolbazi, Banat V and Harran to the north in Anatolia. Several pieces of literature reference Mesopotamian Aksvak and Adab as well. Hamazi. The kingdom of Hamazi, recognized from its inclusion in the Sumerian king list in a locale likely east of the Tigris, is thoroughly documented in the text Aret Thrind. The text indicates that Equids Bar.en originated from Hamazi and was transported to Ebla, while valuable woods from the Syrian region, including boxwood and wooden artifacts, were dispatched through Ebla. Research indicates that Abbasal, which established a treaty with Ebla, is not Assur, but is likely situated on the Euphrates or one of its tributaries. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that Assur was a significant city during the Ebla archives. The earliest Ebla documents do not reference toponyms that can be regarded as a written form of the name of the city of Assur. However, in a recent source regarding Ebla's military assault against Mari, a mention of Assur is quite plausible. In text 75.g 22250, numerous cities are referenced for the first time, with textiles recorded as having been allocated to individuals from Asuruki, some of whom were en route to Kiz, and individuals from Ebla traveling to Asuru. This could represent how the scribes of Ebla inscribed the name of the city of Assur. The geographical reach of this text is broad, likely including cities far from Ebla that have not been previously referenced. All these individuals seek to encounter the Eblaite vizier, Ibizikir, during his expedition to Mari. Asuru is the city of Assur, a significant commercial hub with Upper Mesopotamia and Syria during the late Early Bronze Before period. Gasur. If we interpret Asuruki as referring to Assur, we might also contemplate the possibility that the city denoted in the Ebla documents as Gasuluki or Gasuruki is Gasur, thereafter known as Nuzi. The city referred to as Gasurki is frequently cited in the Ebla documents throughout the archives, and is likely situated between Mari and Ebla, maybe in the vicinity of Emar, as Boneci proposed. Nonetheless, the town referred to as Gasuluki or Gasuruki may have been Gasur during the Old Akkadian era. A place called Gasuluki is referenced in an Enma text set to be published by P. Fronzaroli, a challenging yet captivating composition, authored by Vizier Ibizikir for the king. Ibizikir informs the king about military matters concerning Nagar, Kisvi, and army. Ibizikir is obligated to finance the supplies for the warriors, gurus. We might address one of Ebla's final military endeavors, the fight against army, whereby Nagar and Kish united with Ebla. A reference to Gasur may be included here. In the concluding years of the Ebla archives, another document, 75.g 1945, records the presentation of sheep as offerings to deities and for various other uses. Texts from the final years of Ebla's existence contain references to both Gasur, inscribed as Gasuluki or Gasuruki, and Gasuks, although it is challenging, if not implausible, to believe that scribes employed varying spellings for the same city during the same time frame. The royal archives chronicle the close and frequent political, diplomatic, and commercial contacts between the capital of Nagar, Tel Brak, the surrounding territory, and the kingdom of Ebla. From the Ebla documents, many city names under the political dominion of the principal center of Nagar during the period of the Ebla royal archives may be discerned. One of these is Nabatium, Tel Beidar, as identified by Salaberger. In the annual account of metal 75.G2464, dated to year 3 of Ibrium's tenure as vizier, certain silver deliveries to towns in Nagar, including Nabatium, are noted. The merchant Iram Malik transported the silver. All these towns were likely part of the kingdom of Nagar, following the merchant's route. Nagar and Hamazi were significant bar trade centres, particularly for AN equids, valuable and costly animals sourced from the Iranian region. Veterinary specialists that attended to these animals also originated from Nagar. Centuries later, under the rule of the Mittani kingdom, equine care books were derived from and utilized terminology associated with horses from Indo-Aryan cultures. This indicates that horses and the requisite knowledge for domestication and care originated from that region. Alalak. The Ebla kingdom's territory encompassed another significant city during the era of the Mittani kingdom, Alalak. Immediately upon the demise of Ibrium, or possibly just before his death, though likely in the year of his passing, a campaign was launched against Alalak, which is thereafter referenced more frequently in the writings. By conquering Alalak, Ebla's political expansion extended to the Mediterranean coast, despite Alalak's inland location. Byblos. Byblos was a significant city closely associated with Egypt from the 4th millennium BC and was extensively recorded during the Mittani monarchy and the Amarna period. The significant harbour served as a marketplace for Egyptians to procure valuable timber, particularly cedar, along with various goods from Syria and the East, establishing Syria as a crucial commercial hub. Pettinato hypothesized and dismissed the association of the city of Dulu, frequently referenced in the Ebla writings, with Byblos. Archaeological excavations in Byblos revealed numerous significant and valuable artifacts associated with pharaohs from the 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th dynasty. Pepi the Fern, a contemporary of the final Eblate monarch, Isardamu, is evidenced by multiple artifacts in Byblos. It appears quite unlikely that the kingdom of Ebla lacked any connection with Byblos, an important entity of that era, and nearby. Upon examining the allusions to Dulu in the Ebla documents, I have recently determined that Dulu is the most suitable candidate for Byblos within these texts. The interpretation of the sign Du as Gub is plausible, and the lack of the dual form, evident in the inscriptions of Gubla from the 2nd millennium, should not pose a significant issue. In Egyptian writings, the term Byblos does not appear in dual form. Dulu and Dugurasu, as will be demonstrated, regularly dispatches linen textiles to Ebla. Aside from Dugurasu, no other location reliably dispatches linen textiles to Ebla. The inscriptions documenting the entering quantity of products to the Eblaete royal storerooms, referred to as the Mu-Diu texts, consistently indicate that linen textiles and items crafted from various coloured precious stones are dispatched to Ebla by Dulu and Dugurasu. Some manuscripts record an interdynastic marriage between Tamudasinu, a niece of Vizier Ibrium, and a son of the king of Dulu. The newly uncovered inscription of Ini, an official serving 3 pharaohs of the 6th dynasty, who was dispatched multiple times to Byblos and subsequently to other Syrian cities, to procure commodities such as lapis lazuli, silver, tin, and bitumen, underscores Byblos's significant prominence during the era of the Ebla archives. These factors indicate that Dulu may be Byblos or another town along the Syrian coast to its south. The connections between the Eblate monarchy and Egypt. I wish to underscore the significance of the pre-existing links between Egypt and Syria during the 3rd millennium BC, long before the interactions of the Mittani Empire with Egypt. Archaeological findings from Ebla and other Syrian cities like Byblos illustrate the profound connections between these two locations. The Ebla writings do not mention Egypt or any Egyptian city. Yet, Dugarasu is a plausible contender. The Ebla writings reference substantial amounts of gold utilized for various reasons. The provenance of this gold remains unidentified. From the 2nd millennium onward, Egypt served as the principal gold supplier to all regions of the ancient Near East. Moreover, various Egyptian artifacts, vases, and 2 significant Egyptian items discovered in the royal palace G of Ebla demonstrate that interaction occurred between the 2 kingdoms. There is no reason to believe this contact did not occur during the 4th dynasty under Pharaoh Shephrun's reign. The existence of small lapis lazuli blocks, undoubtedly sourced from Afghanistan, in the royal palace G of Ebla, substantiates that Ebla functioned as a commercial hub for this gemstone. The Ebla texts indicate that the lapis lazuli reached Ebla through Mari, another significant waypoint on the extensive trade route from Afghanistan to Syria, and subsequently to Egypt. Lapis lazuli was highly valued and frequently utilized by the Egyptian court and the pharaohs. Numerous Ebla writings reference amounts of lapis lazuli acquired at Mari by Eblate traders, and lapis lazuli dispatched as a gift from Mari's royal court to the king and queen of Ebla. Lapis lazuli was transported to Ebla over several years by various stewards, leaders of diplomatic delegations, who were dispatched as messengers from the Mari king to the Eblate court. The stone was transported from Ebla to Byblos and thereafter to Egypt. The Ebla writings indicate that Ebla functioned as a commercial center for tin, with evidence suggesting its procurement from Mari. The yearly reports on metal delivery indicate substantial amounts of tin, with copper, were utilized in the production of various bronze artifacts, including numerous weapons. During the Bronze Age, namely in the 3rd millennium, southwest Afghanistan served as Mesopotamia's primary supplier of tin. The Ebla writings indicate that Mari supplied tin and lapis lazuli to Ebla. Decisive evidence now confirms a direct trading tie between Syria and Egypt during the 6th dynasty, a finding that has enthralled the archaeological community. A recently reconstructed Egyptian inscription, derived from various collections in Japan, Spain, and the United States, contains the autobiography of Ini, a significant Egyptian official who lived during the reigns of 3 pharaohs of the 6th dynasty, namely Pepi I and Pepi II. These pharaohs dispatched him to Byblos and Syria to procure goods from these areas. The commodities exchanged include lapis lazuli, tin, silver, and bitumen. The Ebla scriptures reference several presents dispatched by the Eblate court to multiple kingdoms. Conspicuous gifts of lapis lazuli, tin, and silver from the Ebla court are exclusively dispatched to the king of Dugarasu, who never visited Ebla to pledge allegiance. In return, Dugarasu sends gold artifacts, linen textiles, assorted precious stones, and exquisite vases potentially crafted from alabaster to the Ebla court. The items dispatched by Ebla to Dugarasu are identical to those that the official Ini sought to purchase in Syria. Dulu and Dugarasu are frequently referenced in conjunction. Individuals from Dulu arrive in Ebla to report that the expedition of certain merchants to Dugarasu has concluded satisfactorily. In Dugarasu, various officials are depicted as having affiliations with Eblate traders, and their names are distinctly non-Semitic, more accurately interpreted as Egyptian names. The trade of goods and culture between Ebla and Dugarasu exemplifies the richness and diversity of ancient civilizations. The expedition to Dugarasu is extensive, and the envoys of Ebla are provided with numerous textiles for the voyage, as well as multiple textiles for their footwear and headgear. All these factors demonstrate that associating Dugarasu with an Egyptian region or city is quite plausible. Pepi was undoubtedly a contemporary of King Isvar-Damu of Ebla. as evidenced by the discovery of an Egyptian alabaster vase lid inscribed with the cartouche of Pepi III, which commemorates his said festival in the royal palace G of Ebla. The historical evidence discovered in the royal palace of Ebla strongly indicates that Pepi I was a contemporary of King Isvar Damu and his queen, Tabur Damu, and that the two kingdoms maintained a substantial relationship. The intimate connections between the Mittani kingdom and Egypt in the second millennium were established a millennium earlier, during the Edi period, when the kingdom of Ebla maintained close and direct relations, likely with the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty, but certainly with those of the 6th dynasty, contemporaneous with the Eblate kings during the era of the royal archives. Observations on the cultural landscape. Hurrian names are absent in the Ebla writings. However, the name of the ruler of Nagar, Ultumhu, poses challenges in its interpretation as a Semitic name. Hu wed the Eblate princess Tagris Damu during the kingdom's final years. Certain deities documented in the Eblate pantheon were subsequently incorporated into the Hurrian pantheon. Initial Eblate studies saw these deities as evidence of the Hurrians' presence during the Ebla era. It was subsequently established that deities such as Adama and Asvdabil, well documented in the pantheon of the Mittani Empire, were ancient deities of these regions, whose worship had persisted for an extended period before being integrated into the Hurrian pantheon. Some academics suggested that Adama and Asdabil, alongside other divinities such as Kura, Adabal, Baliha, Amarigu, etc., were divinities of a substratum, but no evidence supports this assumption. Conversely, Adabal, a hypostasis of Adad, the formidable storm deity of the Semitic region, is indisputably a Semitic god. The presence of these deities in the local calendar of Ebla, which includes references to their festivals, indicates that they are ancient Syrian deities. The rulers of the states who had close links with Ebla came to the temple of Kura to swear fealty, and from this it may be concluded that they were in some manner subject to Ebla. Otherwise, it would not be easy to understand why they travelled there. Why does the king of Ebla refrain from pledging fealty to a ruler in a different temple? We can be almost sure about this because the king of Ebla never received fabrics for such a trip. Is Kura a divinity worshipped throughout at least northern Syria? Or is he the dynastic divinity of a state more powerful than the others, which are therefore obliged to travel to Ebla? It does not seem probable that Ebla was the strongest kingdom at the time. It was probably stronger than Emar, Ra'ak, Dub, Amar, Burman, Nirar, etc. But even the king of Mari swears allegiance in the temple of Kura in Ebla, and Mari is, without a doubt, stronger than Ebla. 33. Kura was venerated by the inhabitants of Mari too. The fact that Kura was honoured in numerous kingdoms, including Harran and Nagar in Upper Mesopotamia, and by the rulers of Mari suggests that he was a transnational divinity venerated in all of Syria and Upper Mesopotamia. The god Kura may symbolize an epithet of a prominent divine. Kura was a name for Dagon, who was worshipped in Ebla. The king of Nagar, who might not have been able to come to Ebla to renew his pledge, proceeded to the shrine of Dagon in Tutul with other kings from the area. This is where Vizier Ibrium arrived to speak for the king of Ebla. Aret 13, 19, and 15, as 16, on the other hand, details the monarch of the city of Adu's links with Mari and Ebla, and an oath for peace taken before the gods Kura and Adad. The youthful king of Dub swears his allegiance to Ebla once in the temple of Adad. The text references the temple of the god Adad, but does not state the name of the town where the temple stands, and the oath likely took place in a temple of this god in Ebla itself. A temple of Adad in Ebla is referenced in certain texts, such as 75 G, 2507, obverse. The third, 57, Edadalu Esazaki. Multiple accounts reference the offering of 2 sheep to the deity Adad, venerated in the temple of Kura in Ebla. For example, in the long text of sheep gifts to different gods, the offering of 2 sheep to Adad, who was worshipped at the temple of Kura, is recorded. 75, G. 1945, overlection 1520. Tu udu dadai nidba edikuyura. The temple of Kura was dedicated to worshipping several deities, believed to be represented by statues. Kura seems improbable to symbolize Adad, as Adad was venerated in Aleppo, Luban, Arugadu, and Amadu, as Afdabal, Adad is ruler. It is challenging to reconcile numerous concepts of God, Adad. The deity Dagon bestowed upon Sargon of Akkad the cities of Mari, Yarmuti, and Ebla, as he was the preeminent god of the area extending from the Middle Euphrates to western Syria. In conclusion, Kura may represent one of the region's primary deities, Adad and Dagon. It is hard to decide which one, and it isn't easy to comprehend the name Kura. With the decline of Ebla's influence throughout the archives, the significance of the deity Kura may have diminished, while the prominence of other hypostases likely increased. This may elucidate the absence of the deity Kura from the regional cult. The goddess Isvara, the preeminent feminine divinity of the Eblate pantheon, was subsequently revered in the Hurrian pantheon. The queen's mother, Dusigu, and, after her death, the queen, Tabudamu, routinely went on pilgrimages to many sites of the goddess Isvara. They consistently frequented 3 shrines as part of a religious itinerary: Zuramu, Mane, and Uguaz. In the town of Mane inside the Ebla kingdom, perhaps situated near the Euphrates and the kingdom of Emar, a significant sanctuary was dedicated to the goddess Isvara. A location referred to as Eni Maki is recorded in a legal document from Tol Baydar. It may be the same town. Numerous historical, religious, and linguistic issues pertain to the presence of this deity in the Eblate pantheon, and scholarly viewpoints vary significantly. The Ebla scriptures record an interdynastic marriage between the Eblate princess Tagrisvidamu and the son of the king of Naga. The princess arrives in Naga to assume the role of queen, and she is accompanied by her entourage. She introduces her customs, culture, and deities to Naga. Centuries later, Queen Puduhepa incorporated Hurrian deities into the Hittite territory. It is quite likely that an Eblate princess imported Syrian deities into Upper Mesopotamia. A common Semitic calendar was used in a broad territory, including Ebla, Mari, Gasur, Abu Salabuch, and Esnunna during the Adain period. This indicates that these regions sustained intimate interactions and shared a broad cultural milieu. The scribes of Ebla dated all the manuscripts of the Little Archives using the local calendar. But they dated all the major archives, dealing mostly with the external relationships of the Eblate kingdom and the month names of the common Semitic calendar. After the EDI era, this shared Semitic calendar is no longer documented. The decline of Ebla. Examining the texts about the kingdom's late period reveals that Ebla maintained diplomatic relations with numerous kingdoms in its final years. The extensive geographical scope is notable in certain textile writings, such as 75.G 2247, which should be chronologically positioned after Ibizikir's 10th year as vizier. The tablets are substantial. They represent the largest monthly deliveries of textiles and contain numerous listings of towns, potentially adhering to a specific schedule. Ebla was subjugated, plundered, and incinerated, despite its numerous triumphs in warfare and extensive alliances. Various ideas exist concerning the annihilation of Ebla. Archie Biga suggested that Mari was responsible for its destruction. This assertion was endorsed by certain scholars, including Salaberger, while others, such as Mittani, refuted it, attributing the destruction of Ebla to Sargon of Akkad. Was Ebla annihilated by Sargon, Mari, or another adversary? It isn't easy to ascertain this with certainty. The final campaign of Ebla in alliance with Nagar was probably directed at Ami. Numerous writings, Aret Naim, indicate that individuals from Ami were present at Ebla. However, the reason for their presence remains unknown. Can one hypothesize the existence of internal disturbances and issues instigated by the men of Ami, alongside an assault by Ami itself? Is it plausible to assert that following the city's devastation and the conclusion of the ruling dynasty, the area was usurped by Ami Cha Armanum, a city that Naram Sin asserts he conquered in his inscription? The military campaign of Ebla against Mari is the sole certainty we possess, and it likely diminished the strength of both kingdoms. Considering that Vizier Ibizikir engaged in warfare annually, it is evident that the expenses associated with these conflicts were substantial, both in terms of armaments for the military and the loss of human life, potentially due to the city's vulnerability. The struggle with Mari on the battlefields surrounding Terka ended without a definitive victor, as Ibizikir lacked the might to capture Mari, while Mari was compelled to seek peace. Ebla assembled a vast coalition of allies against Mari. Following the military campaign against Mari, the monthly records of fabric deliveries from Ebla to its nearest allies enumerate numerous toponyms, designations of towns and minor kingdoms under Ebla's political dominion, as well as potentially other kingdoms, likely in the territories traversed by the Eblate army. Numerous communities have shown interest in aiding Ebla in its conflict with Mari. Mattiai observed that Ebla's collapse was not preceded by any economic, social, cultural, military or political crisis. It is impossible to ascertain the precise number of years following the military campaign against Mari before Ebla disintegrated. The 3 or 4 year time frame that Archie and I stipulated in our 2003 JCS essay is not assured. We must finalize several monthly statements of fabric delivery, incorporating linguistic connections and organizing them chronologically. The status of Ebla during the years devoid of tablets remains uncertain regarding a potential siege. Syria and Upper Mesopotamia, from the decline of Ebla until the conclusion of Ivb. The Ebla dynasty's authority concluded with the demise of Ebla and the extensive devastation of the city, encompassing the temples. It is not yet known if a significant center succeeded Ebla in the region if such a center existed. Undoubtedly, the town of Aleppo expanded in size and prominence, and the temple of Ivb held significance, as recent discoveries have revealed. Matthias states that the town was seemingly not reconstructed immediately afterward, and notably, the ancient palace structures could not be salvaged. The ruins of Royal Palace G remained entombed beneath the debris from the fire, with no evidence of reconstruction in the subsequent period. The town of the subsequent early Bronze Ivb period was likely smaller, predominantly situated in the northern section of the previous illustrious settlement. Archaeological evidence from surveys conducted at Ebla, Tal Afis, and Tal Tukan indicates that numerous centers are in the EB4B phase and that a demographic crisis did not occur. All the cities and villages referenced in the Ebla writings persisted, urban life continued, and inhabitants remained in the cities. Archaeological and philological evidence from Mari indicates that Ebla was subdued approximately a decade before Mari. Nagar, the principal location in the Upper Kabul region, experienced devastation concurrently with Ebla and was thereafter occupied by Naram Sin, as evidenced by royal inscriptions and archaeological findings. Tal Baydar experienced partial abandonment about the same time as Ebla, but was subsequently reoccupied several decades later. The palace of Tutul was incinerated almost concurrently with that of Ebla. Nonetheless, habitation at Tutul persisted. Synchronizing all these catastrophic events is exceedingly challenging. Tall Mozan, ancient Urks V, in the Upper Kabur, emerged as a significant urban city, governed by a Hurrian ruling family, 49. The scarcity of written materials from Syria and Upper Mesopotamia in EBIVB complicates documenting their history. Modern administrative documents from Mesopotamia frequently have a restricted scope or pertain solely to several prominent regional centers. Royal inscriptions should be utilized with considerable caution in historical literature. Archaeological data, spanning 1,500 years across multiple locations in Syria, has indicated that in northern inland Syria, the available evidence from approximately between 3000 and 1500 BC, there is evidence of occupational continuity, with exceptions occurring in the late 3rd and mid-2nd millennia. In the Upper Kabur region, it was observed that the late EB represents a significant period of disjunction, and sites such as Tall Baydar, Leylan, and Hamukar experienced trauma by the conclusion of this period. However, numerous sites also lack evidence of considerable disruption in their EB-MB sequence. During the early Bronze 4B period, 2300 to 2000 in Syria and Upper Mesopotamia, despite fluctuations in wealth and decline, there likely was no substantial decrease in population or notable deurbanization. The Ebla archives, along with the manuscripts from Tall Baydar and Tall Mozan, are the sole resource for reconstructing the milieu of the mid-3rd millennium, 2500-2300 BC, subsequently bequeathed to the Mittani monarchy. The Ebla archives facilitate the reconstruction of the political and cultural landscape of Syria and Upper Mesopotamia, regions governed by the Mittani state from the 16th century BC. Numerous significant cities under the Mittani Empire had already attained prominence during the Eblate Kingdom, and their existence persisted, despite the severe fluctuations between affluence and fragility. Certain academics regarded Syria and Upper Mesopotamia as peripheral regions of Mesopotamia. Archaeological and literary evidence increasingly indicates that throughout the 3rd millennium BC, Syria and Upper Mesopotamia were located at the convergence of major trade routes from the Middle East and stretching to the Mediterranean, Byblos, and Egypt. Cities like Mari, Nagar, Hamazi, Haran, Byblos, and Ebla were significant hubs along these trade routes. Some remained significant centers well into the era of the Mittani Empire. Cities including Karkemish, Alalakh, Emar, Tolbazi, perhaps Armi from the Ebla period, el Mara, maybe Dub from the Ebla period, Assur and Gasur, which are documented during the Mittani dynasty, were significant during the Ebla period. Certain manuscripts from Tall Mozan, ancient Urkes V, demonstrate that the Hurrian people were already present during the period of the Ebla archives. The historiography of Syria and Upper Mesopotamia during EB-IVB 2300-2000 BC is more challenging due to the paucity of written records from these areas. Modern administrative documents from Mesopotamia frequently have a narrow scope or pertain solely to several regional principal centers. In composing history, one must exercise utmost caution while utilizing royal inscriptions. Nevertheless, archaeological evidence indicates that urban culture persisted in these places and did not result in nomadism, contrary to the assertions of certain scholars. During the EB4B period, 2300-2000, in Syria and Upper Mesopotamia, despite fluctuations in affluence and decline, there is likely no substantial decrease in population or notable deurbanization.